The Changeling. First year. Slytherin. It feels, for a moment, as if the entire world has ended as the Sorting Hat's voice rings out through the great hall. Not even the heavy cloth down around Ginny's ears can muffle the sound of 4 horrified gasps, each familiar enough to her as to be distinguished merely by pattern of air. There must be some mistake, she thinks, once in confusion and a second time more forcefully, as if compelling the Hat to take it back. The Hat doesn't deign a response, Professor McGonagall, not her head of house, sweeping it off her head in one brisk motion. Ginny perches uncertainly on the edge of the stool, McGonagall's steely eyes already moving to the next frightened 11-year-old. "Miss Weasley," she says crisply. "Your table is on the end." Ginny glances at the dark sea of green and silver at the far end, the way the entire table seems tucked into the shadows of the edge of the hall. No. No way. This is a mistake. She turns her head to the Gryffindor table, meets the wide-eyed, horrified stares of her brothers, and stupidly waits for George to crow that it's just a joke, and wasn't it impressive that he could pull a prank this convoluted on her. He'd spent all summer making a fake hat. George just shares a glance with Fred, identical faces all the way to the pale shock of their cheeks. "Miss Weasley," McGonagall repeats, her voice no longer sharp. There's a buzz of sound building in the room, people turning and whispering to each other as Ginny refuses to give up her seat. "Move," she orders her frozen limbs. "Just get up and move." She finds her feet, tries to lift her chin as she walks the great distance to the far table, but the faces waiting there for her are closed, hostile. They whisper behind their hands as she approaches. She perches on the very end of the table, and doesn't let her hands tremble. Much. She doesn't remember much of the feast after that. Later, as she settles into her dormitory in the deepest hidden depths of the castle, not a tower, not a nice roaring fire nor a fat lady to welcome them, she gives herself a mental shake and reminds herself that it's just a house. She reminds herself of this again when the girl in the next bunk turns her nose up at Ginny's second-hand things and the other girls follow suit. Just a house. That doesn't explain why she feels sick in the green-tinged depths. Wrong. As if the lapping waters of the Black Lake above are pressing down on her. She tugs the curtains tightly closed around her bed and tries not to hear the voices of the other girls. She lies in her bed that first night staring at the delicate silver embroidery wrapping around her bed. The beasts and dragons seem to swirl and move, creeping in on her in the dark. She firmly keeps her imagination in check, teeth biting down in the inside of her lip. She's never been afraid of the dark and she isn't going to start now. When the other girls fall quiet, their rhythmic breathing filling the chamber, Ginny shoves back her covers and lifts open her trunk at the foot of the bed. On top is a red and gold scarf knitted by her mother. Ginny grabs it and shoves it down into the deepest recesses of the trunk. It's down there at the very bottom that she finds a book she doesn't remember. Pulling it out, she sees that it is a thin black diary, the cover made of smooth leather. She thinks this must have been a hidden gift from her mother like the scarf, only this one is much more fitting. She blinks back tears and picks up the book, opening it to the first page. "Ginny Weasley," she writes carefully. She considers the words for a while before picking up her quill again. "Ginny Weasley," she writes, "is a Slytherin." Her heart pounds as she stares at the words. Splotches of ink drip from the quill where it hovers uncertainly over the page. "No." Ginny scribbles across the damning words, quill slashing and obliterating. "Take it back, take it back, take it back," she writes beneath it, over and over again. For the first time that day, something finally cooperates. The ink sinks back into the page, leaving nothing but quiet, creamy expanse as if the words never existed in the first place. This book will keep her secrets. She lifts the quill to the surface again and asks the one question that's been echoing in her mind all day: what did I do wrong? The words slowly bleed away. For a moment, she almost wishes the diary could answer. She wakes the next morning with no great answers, no simple fix. Out in the halls, Fred and George drape their arms over her shoulders and say it's no big deal, but she's been living with them her whole life and knows when they are lying. It is a big deal. She doubts she has even begun to understand all the ways in which it's a big deal, just knows it is. Even Percy thinks it, judging from the way he pats her arm awkwardly and solemnly shakes his head back and forth as if to a dirge. Ginny has never before realized just what a prig he is. She shares this thought with her diary and wonders if this is viciousness. If this is why she's here. Did the hat see something in her? She watches the ink sink in and disappear, like an act that never happened. She imagines it makes her feel lighter, just a little bit. The first time Errol labors his way into the great hall with post from home, Ginny imagines her mother's tone is strained. Just words on paper, but she imagines her mother's confusion. Pansy Parkinson, voice perfectly pitched to carry as far down the table as possible, notes she's never seen a more decrepit and pathetic-looking owl in her entire life. Did it have some sort of disease? Ginny lowers her head and forces bone dry toast down her throat. During the day, she has classes to fill her moments. There's no one to sit with but quiet Smita, the housemate who was unlucky enough to get stuck with Ginny. They don't speak except when Smita needs Ginny to pass her Eye of Newt, and Ginny doesn't bother trying for anything more. She learns instead to focus down on the feeling of a wand in her fingers made for her and her alone. If she tries hard enough, this is one place things can bend to her will, work out the way she expects them to. Magic makes sense. She excels. While Fred and George and Ron are all ease and laughter, surrounded by friends and immersed in the luxury of just sliding by, she pulls marks her mother had begun to give up hope for in her younger brood. It makes Ginny wonder just what Percy and Bill and Charlie and their top marks might have been running from. At night, she pours her frustration and confusion into the only place she can, her diary. She writes each and every word she thinks but doesn't dare say during the day. Every doubt, every dark feeling, and sometimes it feels like it's the quill moving and not her. One day it answers back, and it's the most natural thing in the world. You aren't alone, Ginny. His name is Tom. He's her only friend. She rises from bed the next morning feeling empty, floating like a ghost. It's easier. Midway through the first term, Bill sends her a letter. Slytherin, he says by way of greeting, and she appreciates this lack of coddling. No easing in, just going for broke. I went to Madame Putterfut's with a Slytherin girl in my 4th year. We had quite the snog. Her hands clench, paper crinkling in her fingers. It's no big deal. Not that you should go around snogging feckless Gryffindors. Certainly not until well after your 4th year. Ginny chokes back a laugh, the feeling foreign and forgotten, a smile threatening to crack her face in half from disuse. Mum liked to complain about it, but Bill has always spoken to her like an adult, someone things don't need to be hidden from. I know everyone's telling you it's just a house, but I think it's more important that you remember you're a Weasley, and that's the one that matters. She sets the letter aside, folding it carefully and pressing it into the pages of her diary. The problem is that red hair aside, she's beginning to doubt she's really a Weasley. The Weasleys have been in Gryffindor for 4 generations after all, and the Pruitts another 3. She begins to wonder if her mother made some sort of pact with a fairy to have her, the precious only daughter, and this is the unforeseen price. Maybe she's a changeling. She reads about it hidden in the back of the library at lunch, unable to face a table of strangers. Only the books tell her a changeling child should have untold strength, and she doesn't feel it. In the end, it's only Tom who understands. You don't need anyone else. She walks around with ink-stained fingers and learns to breathe through the airless moments, to keep walking when she wants to do nothing more than disappear. She could run home, leave this all behind, but she hasn't walked away from a challenge since she was 4 years old and broke into Bill's trunk to stow away to Hogwarts. This is her dream, being here. She just never imagined it like this. Ginny. Smita says once during potions, something almost like an inquiry, but when Ginny turns, the girl's face is all hard angles and disapproval. She doesn't think you're worthy. But I do. Ginny feels her gut clench and thrusts the bowl of eviscerated flobberworms towards Smita. They finish the lesson in silence. When the blackouts begin, she feels a strange sort of relief. Waking up with blood on her fingers and no memory seems a fitting thing for a Slytherin. Isn't it? Only then people start getting hurt. What's going on? She scribbles in the pages. What is happening to me? Tom always has the answer. You're stronger than you know, Ginny. By the time she begins to suspect, to work it all out in her increasingly fuzzy mind, there's no one to tell. She approaches Ron once, the brother who won't even meet her eye anymore, but it's Harry who actually notices her. "Ginny," he asks, his flitting attention all too quickly distracted as he frowns at a group of Hufflepuffs deliberately crossing the hall so as not to walk too close to the supposed heir of Slytherin. If only they knew. She can't tell if she wants to laugh or throw up. In the end she says nothing, not wanting to see the blame there in Harry's eyes. The sense of, "I knew it. Slytherin." She shakes her head and walks away with the diary burning against her thigh. When Tom takes her down to the deepest dark spaces of Hogwarts, she thinks maybe she'll just be able to disappear, judging by the way her body seems to melt into the stone. Only that isn't what she's here for, she realizes all too late. She isn't here for punishment. She's bait. He'll come. Ginny has her doubts. She lies, more dead than alive it seems, lies there and watches Tom try to rewrite the past future present. Does absolutely nothing to stop it. Maybe if she'd been a Gryffindor, she would have been able to. She's still surprised to wake up and find Harry there. There was a time that might have meant everything to her. He's injured, nearly died for her, even as life begins to rush back into her flesh, not pins and needles, but knives and mallets. There's no point in stopping the tears, the pints and pints she's been collecting all year long. "It's all right," Harry says, patting her shoulder awkwardly, clearly more comfortable with basilisks and evil wizards than hopeless little girls. "Riddle's gone. What does that fix, really?" She stares down at the ruined diary, bleeding ink across his lap. Her words, her secrets, blurred and tarnished as they ooze out on the floor. She shakes her head, pulling her legs hard into her chest. Harry never should have come down here. Not for her. "Ginny," he says, bewildered concern weighting his tone. "I'm a Slytherin," she mumbles miserably into her knees. "Just like Tom. Just like Pansy and Malfoy and every dark wizard who has ever fallen." More than anything she wants to hear Harry say, "So what?" to tell her it doesn't matter. But he just stares back at her, confusion furrowing his brow. For the first time he doesn't look like a hero, but rather a scared little boy. She isn't sure what to make of that. "Aberration," comes Tom's dying whisper, thorns still dug in and holding despite the fact that he should be gone. "You don't fit his careful columns of good versus Slytherin." And yet he was the one they all suspected. Ginny wants to shake the voice away, claw it out of her skull. There's painful anger here over something she does not understand, things she's too young to grasp, just knows that for all she poured into Tom, he poured some things back. These are not the sorts of things a little girl is supposed to feel. Try as she might, she can't see Harry Potter in quite the same light ever again. Maybe he's still a hero, but she's never going to be a princess. Was the hat right? Is this who she really is? Her silly crush doesn't stand a chance against the weight of all that. She lets Harry lead her out and save her and explain away her failings to her waiting family, but knows she's leaving something behind she'll never get back. Innocent little Ginny Weasley never leaves that chamber. The greatest irony is that her disgrace makes her a proper Slytherin at last. In the common room everyone vies for her attention, sidling up next to her and asking what it had been like, to have such a beast under her control, to know she had the ability to kill and destroy, wash this place of mudbloods, if only she hadn't been caught in her own trap. Mudbloods. She thinks of Hermione Granger and her frizzy mane, the way she smiles at Ginny in the halls, kind, but guarded. The way that even she, the smart one, is not completely sure of Ginny out of the context of Gryffindor. How did you get away with it for so long, her housemates want to know. She doesn't know what to say, how to explain to them about victims and lack of choice and pouring out precious secrets and feelings to someone who didn't deserve them. Doesn't know how to risk speaking without betraying her weakness. She may not know much, but even she already understands the danger of weakness. She needs to speak, to find the perfect lie, but her throat freezes and betrays her. Only somehow her silence does not condemn her. This is how she unexpectedly learns the power of silence. The power of not acting, when all she'd ever been raised to know was running blindly ahead. When they demand a recounting, Ginny presses her lips together in a thin line, looking sideways at her housemates. Understand that people will fill in the blanks with whatever they need. It holds her long enough to survive the last few chaotic days of the term, to keep herself together until she can finally slip away. She doesn't like to think of it as running, but she's grateful all the same for the sheer distance from Hogwarts and the relentless memories that her family's impromptu trip affords. The harsh sunlight of Egypt burns into her skin, her family pressing in on all sides. Maybe it will be enough to make Tom fade, like a picture left too long in direct light. She hopes. Out on the sandy dunes, Bill steps up next to her, hand mussing her hair with distracted affection. A few feet away, the twins are trying to shove Percy into a tomb. It's all so startlingly normal, like the last year never happened, that Ginny finds it a little hard to breathe. Bill squeezes her shoulder. Your first year in Slytherin and you already faced off with you-know-who and derailed his plans, eh? That isn't exactly the way it happened, but Ginny doesn't have the heart to correct him, or perhaps her mouth has learned too well to keep its secrets. Maybe it doesn't matter anyway. The only other person to know the full truth of what happened down there is Harry, and he's thousands of miles away with no clearer understanding than her own. Bill leans in closer, grinning mouth near her cheek like a conspirator. What a disappointment you would be to good old Sorlaser. She smiles because it's expected. But also because proving to be a poor Slytherin is supposed to be a good thing, right? He tugs on her braid. Weasley, he says, an affectionate accusation. Ginny leans into Bill's side, thinking that maybe she'll let herself believe that. Just for a little while. Year 2. This year is going to be different. Or so Ginny tells herself over and over again on the train. She's proven right, in a way, when dark-garbed demons climb on midway to Hogwarts. That's different in a whole new way, horrifying, but one that only manages to suck out any optimism she may have been clinging to. She can't quite explain it, the way every tiny bit of warmth is leached from her body as they pass, gliding silently just a few inches above the floor. They pause, the empty places where a face should be turning towards her compartment. Ice frosts the glass and a buzzing builds in Ginny's ears. Aberration. She's transfixed, trapped, until the demons move on, departing as quietly as they appeared. Ginny shivers and pulls her worn robes more closely around her body. The entire train seems subdued for the rest of the ride, timid whispers about the guards of Azkaban and an escaped prisoner tripping down the halls. Dementors. They were something she grew up hearing about in her brother's twisted idea of a bedtime story, but had never seen. She never wants to see one ever again. Luckily, the floating horrors don't follow them inside Hogwarts, staying outside the school gates, but she still thinks she can feel them hovering. Or maybe it's just that after a summer bundled up in the boisterous chaos of her family, Hogwarts feels cold. She doesn't remember it being so still, so quiet despite the press of students. It could just be Slytherin's hushed spaces under the lake that are dreadful. Too much like the chamber, hard stones under her bones. She avoids the common room as much as she can, sneaking up onto the grounds. Not towards the gates and those things, but always away. The grass around the lake is tall and soft, too long left untrod during the summer holiday. Her trainers wear a path day after day as she walks. She lingers in a spot within sight of Hagrid's hut and the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Sometimes she wonders about the things hiding in there. She can understand the impulse. Mostly, she just stands on the edge of that hill and stares. Sometimes she lets gravity win just to see what it feels like, wind and adrenaline and heat in her muscles. Her feet trip down the steep hill towards the trees, momentum keeping her right on the edge of losing her footing once and for all. Then she hits the flat, legs buckling, and she falls hard to her knees, feeling her flesh bruise and split. Twisting onto her back, she gasps great breaths, her chest burning, face flushed with exertion as she stares up at the clear summer sky. She gets up, climbs the hill, and does it all over again. Underscore 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 underscore. The notice appears on the bulletin board the third week of school, hard crisp edges around angular black writing. Trials for house Quidditch team will be held Saturday at 9. Someone jostles Ginny from behind, people shouting to each other across the room. She lets herself get elbowed to the back of the pack. She can't forget the words anyway, not now that she's seen them. She knows what she wants. Wants more than anything. She's only a second year, but she doesn't think on that. She just remembers the breathless press of wind and gravity working against her as she tumbled down Hagrid's hill. She doesn't consider that maybe she just wants to be a part of something, once and for all. Over the summer her father told her, "You have to make of this what you can, Ginny." Her mother had simply said, "You can always come home." Ginny has no intention of running home. The day of tryouts dawns crisp and clear, the first taste of autumn in the air. There was a time she might have taken that as a good sign. "Hey," someone calls as she walks out on the pitch with her pathetic borrowed school broom. "I think you're in the wrong place, girlie." The speaker is Terence Higgs, returning chaser. He's got at least a foot and a half on Ginny, but she thinks with silent derision that girlie is probably the best insult he is capable of. That kind of undoes a lot of the intimidation. A chaser is about more than height. She's prepared for them to give her a rough time, to try to tell her she can't try out, but there aren't any rules against second years having brooms, or trying out, and more importantly, she knows she can do this, size and age and experience notwithstanding. In the knowing is the power, she tells herself. Only then the captain, a troll of a boy called Marcus Flint, looks over at her, his face hardening. Before he can tell her to get lost, Ginny hops on the broom and streaks up towards the stands as smoothly as the wobbling hand-me-down can manage. The sound of voices and harsh laughter follow her, riding along on the wind, but it's the crack of a bat that she's really listening for, the telltale whiz and whine that follows it. She holds her trajectory until the last possible second before shifting her weight, letting the broom drop away under her in a daredevil move that would have given her mum heart palpitations if she were here to witness it. For a full beat of her heart she's falling, completely weightless. Ginny's left thigh burns with exertion, but digs in hard against the broom, swinging her body completely around just in time to see the bludger streak by less than half a foot above her head. She does not flinch away, even as her hair flutters in the breeze of the close call. She does not yell, just hovers, meeting the stares of the boys still on the ground. She ignores the boy with the bat in his hand and instead watches Flint, daring him. She feels the impatient vibration of the broom under her hands, but knows that to budge now is to surrender. Fred and George and Charlie and Ron, they taught her this one minuscule skirmish at a time. All she's asking for is a chance. Eventually Flint looks away, waving his arm. "Okay, you lazy wankers. Get your asses up on your brooms." With surprising efficiency and authority, though peppered more often than not with obscenities, Flint runs them through a vigorous series of drills. All except Malfoy, that is. He seems content to float above all of them, drifting aimlessly on his shiny, top-of-the-line broom. His contribution, his father's bountiful wealth. Ginny sighs with disgust. Distracted by her thoughts, she doesn't notice the quaffle coming until it's slamming into her solar plexus. She manages to snatch it up against her chest and refuses to let it stun her, just takes great swallowing breaths while she weaves and dodges for the goals in the distance. She nearly loses her head to a vicious bludger from behind, but manages to swivel hard around and fling the quaffle into the lower right ring. She focuses relentlessly after that. What she lacks in size she makes up for with speed and agility and a reckless sort of nerve that serves her well as chaser. Flint makes her run drills longer and harder than anyone else, but if he hopes to break her with harsh conditions, he's chosen the wrong tactic. She feels a fire burning in her stomach, something familiar but almost forgotten, like for the first time she feels a little like she did before Tom. Before Slytherin. Up in the air, it feels like anything is possible. She's still nearly trembling with fatigue when Flint finally lets her get her feet on the ground. He gives her a long hard stare, maybe checking one last time if she'll just give up. She doesn't. As he passes her by, he smacks her hard on the back, nearly planting her exhausted body face first in the dirt. "Just don't mess this up, weasel." She leans heavily on her cleanseep and hopes he doesn't notice. "Excuse me." He doesn't stop walking, talking back at her over his shoulder. "Practice on Mondays and Thursdays at 4. He points to a shiny, only slightly used Nimbus 2001 leaning against a wall. "Don't be late. Or I'll change my mind." She watches him walk away, waiting for the punchline, the vicious ending to what must be a joke. The pitch is dead silent though, and she's all alone. It's the arrival of the Ravenclaw team that finally pushes her to exchange the cleanseep for the smooth handle of the Nimbus. It seems to hum against her skin in recognition. She's on the team. She gives herself one long moment to revel in it. She will have all night to scrutinize every last inch of the broom in her hands. For now she simply imagines the looks on her brothers' faces. Then she takes a measured breath, props the broom up on her shoulder, and reminds herself that she still has a lot to prove. She smiles, just a little, as she walks back up to the castle. Her hand rubs across her stomach. She's not sinking quietly into the stones this time. Never again. Underscore 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 underscore. Word travels fast through the ranks, little Ginny Weasley stealing her way onto the Quidditch team. Her housemates size her up in the common room. She hears half-swallowed whispers of air of Slytherin from time to time, nestled in right next to Chaser. It's not what she ever thought her life would be, but maybe that's okay. Even Malfoy deigns to speak to her, most of the younger students following suit. The older ones ignore her like they ignore all the young ones, too involved with owls and NEWTs and sneaking out onto the grounds to snog. Ginny Malfoy will say, drawling her name out long, arm thrown over her shoulder. She knows what she wants to say, your father gave me that diary, but that is never what she can say. Because for a bit, belonging is so much nicer. This is her house, her life, and she needs to make of it what she can. And Slytherin can't be so bad as they say, not if she ended up here, right? She practices with the same abandon she shows her lessons. Given something to focus on, she refuses to do anything less. She will not give Flint a single moment to regret his decision. He just ends every practice with a slap to her back and a warning not to screw up. She grows to appreciate the predictability of it. She watches the first match between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff with anticipation tingling in her fingers, cataloguing each and every move used by the Chasers, the good to emulate, the bad to avoid. Her absorption is so complete that she doesn't notice the Dementors have wandered out of bounds until the chill shudders across her skin, a hated voice ghosting in her ears. People scream and push to their feet, fingers pointing at a black blur plummeting towards the ground. Not so special after all, Tom mocks. Harry Potter is falling out of the sky. Ginny's heart drags up into her throat, her hand pulling out her wand before she realizes she has no idea how to save him, no way to return the favor. The boy who went splat. No, Ginny says. Screams. She doesn't know. Tom is still just laughing. Then Dumbledore is there, face pale and furious and energy crackling from his entire body like a silver explosion that forces the Dementors back. Harry hits the ground a fraction of a moment later with barely a sound, as if the entire world's been turned into soft downy pillows. Ginny's knees buckle, dumping her back on her seat. If she were more fanciful, she might have taken that as a sign of things to come. But she's not. Her heart gradually settles back where it is meant to be, her pulse calm. 3 days later she's able to climb onto her broom with no more trepidation than before. She forces herself to forget all over again that sometimes gravity wins. Underscore 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 underscore. They win their first match. Sure, Ravenclaw is nothing to worry about really, but Ginny scores 7 goals, even after getting her shoulder grazed by a bludger 2 minutes into the game. If she gave herself a moment to think about it, she might wonder at the accuracy of that bludger coming from the wrong end of the field, only she doesn't, because her team is smiling at her and reliving their greatest moments from the match as they stream back up to the castle in one huge group. It feels like maybe she's actually a part of something for the first time since she came here. She thinks they may finally accept her, now that she's proven what she can do. She's never felt quite so alive as she did on that broom, screaming crowds on all sides. The common room is loud and boisterous and somehow warmer that night. The heat of bodies and ringing sound of raised voices clear the chill from the space, and when they pass around a bottle of something not quite named, she sips it along with everyone else despite the taste. She doesn't notice when the others stop, when they begin to slap her on the back and urge just one more swallow, Malfoy's voice close to her ear. Things get fuzzy really fast after that. Later she will have vague memories of saying yes to the tattoo, to feeling no pain at all as they grouped around her and called her one of their own. She will not allow herself to remember that she alone has a jagged little green line of a snake twisting across the inside of her wrist. She does this because this is belonging. And it's good. She still wakes up the next morning feeling like death hovering on the edge of a bridge. She pulls back her curtains with a groan. The lamplight sears into her eyes and for once she's actually thankful that their dormitory is underground. Sunlight just might kill her. You look terrible. Ginny squints up to find her roommate Smita standing next to her bed, holding a smoking goblet. Ginny frowns. Gee. Thanks. Smita doesn't seem to take her chilly tone as a hint to leave her the hell alone, instead holding out the goblet. Ginny eyes it warily. For all she knows, Smita has decided to poison her for lack of anything else to do this weekend, but she's too miserable to worry out motivations. Reaching for the goblet, she takes a hesitant sip. It burns down her throat, bringing tears to her eyes, but before she can yell in protest, it settles in her stomach like a warm golden glow pulsing through her body. It softens all the edges, and Ginny doesn't hesitate to swallow the rest down. By the time she empties the cup, she almost feels human again. Thank you, Ginny says in a rush, peering up at her roommate a little more closely. Is it just her aching head or does Smita look slightly less mean today? Ginny tentatively smiles at her. Smita does not smile back. She simply nods her head once and turns on her heel and leaves. So much for that theory. Ginny lowers her head carefully back to the bed. Someone wake me up when it's Monday, she mumbles to the empty room. Underscore 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 underscore. Ginny arrives at the Great Hall a few minutes late for breakfast. Her brothers step up on either side of her before she even gets a foot in the hall. Where did you learn to fly like that? George demands. Fred scoffs loudly. Clearly from watching us all these years, George. Ginny rolls her eyes and decides not to spill her secrets. All they ever did was turn her into a thief. They didn't teach her Quidditch. They taught her perseverance. Daring. She thinks in some ways those are way more important anyway. Shaking her brothers off at the Gryffindor table, she crosses the room to her own table. Morning, Six Bletchley says, nodding to her. How's the head? Ginny gives him a wry smile, feeling her cheeks flush. Still attached. Barely. They all laugh, Flint tossing her a piece of toast. Ginny smiles wider and reaches for the pumpkin juice. After breakfast, Malfoy walks out of the hall with her, Pansy and Goyle and Crabbe silent sentinels on either side. Malfoy is still single-mindedly reliving their victory. Did you see the way I grabbed that snitch from under his nose, he says, reaching out as if to reenact the play. That's not exactly the way it happened, but Ginny smiles nonetheless, tucking her books into her chest and nodding along. She's one of them now. Really and truly. And being one of them means having people to walk with in the halls, and sit with at meals. And after classes every day, she has a shiny, expensive amazing broom to ride, one she knows her brothers are jealous of down to the bone. It's more than she ever could have hoped. Still, when she passes a poster of Sirius Black in the halls one day, she finds herself staring at him screaming out silently from a tattered page. She wonders what it was, that final straw that made him break, that made him kill. A year ago she would have looked away, unable to face it. Now she's mesmerized and doesn't know why. But none of that really matters, because she has Quidditch. It emboldens her, the cold fingers of air in her hair, gravity pulling and fighting for control of her flesh. She is its master. She doesn't believe in the fall, only the climb. She and Smita even talk sometimes now, about more than simple potion ingredient requests. It's nice. Nice is enough. She's tired of being alone. Laughing along with Malfoy and his friends as they walk in the halls, Ginny keeps her eyes straight ahead when she passes a poster of Sirius Black. She knows what she's doing. underscore 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 underscore. She's climbing down into the common room after a potions lesson when she hears familiar voices floating up the stairs. What's going on with you and the Weasley girl, Draco? Pansy asks, voice shrill with disapproval. Ginny comes to an abrupt stop, her school books bumping against her hip. You've got her trailing around after you like a house elf. Ginny waits, stupidly, for Malfoy to defend her. To point out that she's on the house Quidditch team. That she's valuable. That she's one of them. Instead, he drawls, I know. Isn't it pathetic? You spend 5 seconds being nice to her and she falls all over herself to be your best friend. Ginny feels her stomach plummet into her toes as the harsh laughter echoes into the stairwell. Did you see the tattoo? Pansy asks. I can't believe she let you do that. She must be desperate. They all laugh again, Malfoy's sniveling sound right in the middle of it. Let me guess, Draco, a high, nasally voice Ginny identifies as Blaise Zabinai says. You have plans for her. She can't see his lecherous smile, but it's all there in his voice. Can you imagine? Malfoy responds with a scoff. Snogging Weasel's tiny baby sister. It would destroy him. There's more laughter ringing throughout the space, and Ginny abruptly turns, wanting to slap her hands to her ears. She feels like sliding down the wall, collapsing onto the steps, but knows that if she does that, she may never get back up again. She supposes this is what gravity winning really feels like. Smita touches her arm, and Ginny jerks under the touch. She doesn't need the reminder that her humiliation has an audience. The hand only grows more insistent though, so Ginny forces herself to look up. Smita looks straight at her. No pity, no amusement. I'm hungry, she says, like this is just another boring history of magic class. You. Ginny stares back at her in utter numbness. Smita's hand tugs at her arm, and Ginny lets herself get pulled away. They eat in silence. Underscore 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 underscore. Quidditch isn't fun anymore, and that's the biggest insult of all. Malfoy still drawls her name in the halls, winking at her on the Quidditch pitch, and she's ashamed to admit she doesn't do anything about it. She doesn't stop to talk like she would have before or anything, but neither does she tell him off. She doesn't let herself think too hard about why. Instead she puts on a brave face during the day and carries on like nothing has changed. At night, she learns to swallow her tears like another weakness. Learns to swallow them and not choke. She finds herself reaching for her trunk sometimes, for pages that aren't there, and only ends up hating herself even more for the impulse. She never wanted to feel like a ghost again, no matter how much easier it might be. You know, Smita says one day while she's pounding a tentaculous pod to paste with a steady thud, thud, thud. Her voice is as close to sharp as Ginny has ever heard it. Lucius Malfoy was sacked from the Board of Governors over the summer. Ginny's eyes swivel to her fuzzy brain trying to figure out just what that is supposed to mean. What does she care about Lucius Malfoy? Smita shrugs. I'm just saying. At dinner, Ginny sits a few spaces down from Malfoy, close enough to watch, but not close enough to talk. She watches his normal calm assurance, his inherent aura of superiority, but she thinks there's something right underneath. Something that makes her think of those screaming posters of Sirius Black again. She watches him laze his way through practices, but here's the way he constantly brings up the brooms, his father. Brings them up far too often. She notices a lot of things now that she's bothering to look. In potions, Ginny turns to Smita, pulling up her sleeve to bear the green stain on her wrist. Do you think you could help me get rid of this? Smita gives her a long assessing look. Eventually she nods. Yeah. I can try that. Ginny considers that maybe she's had an ally she never noticed before. Despite everything they come up with though, they can't remove the tattoo. It remains stubbornly inked in place. Like a reminder, Ginny thinks. But Smita does help her learn to magic the alcohol from her cup before drinking it without saying a single word. NEWT's level magic, Smita says with a hard gleam in her eye that Ginny is beginning to find intensely comforting. The team simply begins to compliment her on her ability to handle her drink. She smiles and tugs her sleeve down lower over her wrist. Underscore 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 underscore. Most days Ginny can't decide if she's more angry with Malfoy or with herself. How stupid has she been? At practice, she imagines flinging his father's precious broom to his feet as if it is nothing to her, a mere trifle. She would raise an eyebrow, hand on one hip like an old friend returning to roost. There aren't enough brooms in the world, Malfoy, she imagines saying, the rest of the team looking on. She is too good to dismiss, she reminds herself. She is too important to victory, and this is another sort of power. She is a much better chaser than Malfoy is a seeker. And it's with that realization that she begins to understand that Malfoy's sudden acceptance of her had as much to do with her Chamber of Secrets fame as his father's loss of position. Malfoy needs her, not the other way around. He wouldn't be able to do anything about her rejection, his face burning scarlet as they walked out onto the pitch. She closes her eyes and imagines it with triumphant clarity. Only she doesn't do any of those things. Instead, when the time comes for their next match, she waits until the rest of the team has shuffled outside and carefully places her Nimbus 2001 back in the equipment trunks. There is a sharp little pain in her chest as she lets the shiny, smooth handle go, but she forgets it quickly as she plucks up an old familiar clenseep, the wood rough under her palm. This weightlessness she feels has nothing to do with broom make. Ginny scores 12 goals and watches with grim satisfaction as the Hufflepuff Seeker flies circles around Malfoy. Fancy brooms are not all they are stacked up to be, it seems. She tosses a startled Cedric Diggory a brilliant smile as she stakes past and laughs loudly into the wind. This is better than belonging. It might even be better than winning. Ginny swerves towards the goalposts, determined to do her best to keep them ahead. In the end though, it's Diggory who grabs the snitch while Malfoy is dawdling on the wrong end of the pitch. Ginny touches down as the stands empty out. Hufflepuff celebrates loudly in the middle of the field. Great flying, Ginny Harry says as he passes by with a gaggle of Gryffindors. She's got mud in her teeth and sweaty hair plastered to her neck, but she doesn't much care. She's not a little girl with a butter dish on her elbow anymore. Thanks is all she says. He doesn't linger. The next match is between the two of them for the championship, after all. And Ginny has no intention of losing that too. Fred and George stop by as well, but mostly just to ask her if she's lost her bloody mind, willingly giving up a Nimbus 2001 for an old school-owned clenseep. She just smiles and lets them think what they want. She doesn't expect them to understand. How could they? Their lives have always been exactly what they expected them to be. She supposes that makes them lucky. Malfoy is smart enough to notice something has shifted, that his gift has been thrown back in his face, even if only metaphorically. But as she suspected, he can't do anything about it. Not when he'd failed to catch the snitch and she'd nearly single-handedly made up the difference. Still, he and his cronies start sneering at her across the breakfast table. At least it's honest, she thinks. She smiles back at them like this is nothing and helps herself to a second plate of eggs. Flint flops down next to Ginny and starts arguing with Bletchley over what new drills they are going to have to integrate into practice if they are going to beat Gryffindor. Double practices all next week, he declares. What do you think, Six? He asks her. They don't seem to care what broom Ginny flies, as long as she keeps scoring. She lifts her chin. I'm up for it, she says. Still, nothing feels quite the same anymore. She can see the cracks now, hear the hollow ring of people only saying what they think people want to hear. She convinces herself this is a lesson well learned. Underscore 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 underscore. They don't win the match against Gryffindor. It's strange to look across the pitch and see two brothers and an old childhood crush on the other side. She thinks, before her first few goals, her brothers may have been going easy on her. That didn't last after the first time she unerringly slammed a quaffle home past wood. Still, in the end it comes down to the simple fact that Gryffindor outplays them. And Harry Potter once again claims the snitch while Malfoy plays the fool. The Gryffindor are in a triumphant dogpile in the middle of the pitch, Harry lost somewhere under the tangle. Malfoy is glaring at them a few feet away, brushing his hair back from his face with jerky motions. Defeat doesn't look good on him. He catches her watching him, his expression hardening, and she raises one eyebrow at him, her eyes deliberately straying to his broom. The insult is clear. His face flushes, and Ginny turns away, falling in step with a cursing Flint. Losing sucks. Ginny can't deny it. But she thinks as Smithar meets her at the edge of the pitch, that at least she's beginning to see things for what they really are. That has to be worth it. Right. But, oh, does it have to hurt this much? Sorry you lost, Smithar says in that particular way of hers, not cold, Ginny is realizing, just steady. Ginny shrugs. There's always next year. Smithar nods and mentions a rune she thinks Ginny might be able to carve into the handle of her broom for better rapid deceleration. Ginny smiles. This time, she thinks she may actually mean it. Underscore 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 underscore. The rest of the term passes in a flurry of exams and farewells and a mass murderer breaking out of the castle, on a hippogriff, of all things, if school rumor is to be at all believed. Ginny wonders sometimes just how close she'd come to finding herself face to face with Sirius Black in a dark corridor, what she might have done in that situation. She gets a sick little thrill in her stomach at the thought. She's still pretty sure she has questions, just no idea why she thinks he may have the answers. Ron is back out of the infirmary before she even gets a chance to go visit him. When she does manage to track him down in the halls between classes the last day, he, Harry, and Hermione are even more tight-lipped and inscrutable than usual. She's risking making them all late for class by flagging them down, but it's not like Ginny can just pop on down to the Gryffindor common room to make sure Ron is okay. What? Ron complains, impatience clear in his voice. Annoyance at his stupid kid sister. She holds back her flinch, hand compulsively pulling her sleeve down lower over her wrist. Oh, Merlin, one of these days she is going to have to wear a short sleeve and then life is going to get really loud if Molly Weasley has anything to do with it. I'm just glad you're okay, Ron, she mumbles in a rush, tucking her books into her chest and turning back down the way she came. She hears the solid smack of hand against flesh and a disgruntled "ow" from Ron, but doesn't turn back to look. Ginny spends the train ride to London sitting next to Smithar. A few first-year Slytherin girls sit across from them, their eyes nervous as they go at each other with silent communication. Clearly they are here on a dare of some sort. The bold one of the group finally manages to speak about an hour into the trip, and Ginny braces herself for inquiries about Malfoy, about the chamber, about her stupid Gryffindor brothers. You're the first girl on the Slytherin Quidditch team in over a decade, the girl says in a rush. Ginny frowns. Really? She hadn't actually even noticed. If she had, she wonders if she still would have had the nerve to try out. The three girls nod in unison, staring at her, not like a freak or an outsider or even a girl, but like she's a hero. Well, Ginny says, swallowing against the discomfort rising in her throat. It's probably about time that changed then. Yes, the bold one says with a glimmer in her eye that Ginny recognizes all too well. Next to her, Smithar's shoulder casually bumps against hers. Hey, she says, nodding towards the passing trolley, the tiniest hint of something that only on Smithar would be considered a smile. I'm hungry. You. Ginny bites the inside of her lip. Yeah, she agrees. Me too. The rest of the trip does not pass in silence. Maybe, Ginny thinks, this is what belonging is really supposed to feel like. underscore 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 underscore. Back at the burrow, Ginny kneels on the edge of her mother's garden. The sun is warm on the back of her neck, her hands cool in the dark soil. A shadow falls over her, and she looks up to see Ron standing over her. She lifts an eyebrow, surprised to see him. Of all her family, it's always been with him that she feels the greatest tension, the greatest distance, like he can't quite bring himself to forgive her for the treasonous act of being sorted a Slytherin. But now, in the summer sun, he kneels next to her in the dirt and says, "How are you, Gin?" in a soft, confused voice that makes her ache in unexpected places. He may not be the most emotionally enlightened boy in the world, but he's the sort to always rectify things when he finally figures it out, not matter how much it costs. She wonders what's changed. "I'm good," she says, partly because she believes it will be true someday and partly because she knows this is what he needs to hear. Ron nods, yanking up a marigold in his distraction. The tension hasn't quite left his shoulders yet. He hasn't talked much about what happened that day he broke his leg, the day Sirius Black escaped from Hogwarts, no matter how much Fred and George harass him for details. She has some ideas though, what that might have been like. "I'm sorry about Scabbers," she says. Ron's face blanches, but it's not grief, rather something a bit like disgust. He recovers after a moment, clearing his throat. "Yeah, well, he was old." She's long since learned to see through his bluster to the affection hidden underneath, a little sister's prerogative, but this is something different than indifference towards a careworn hand-me-down. She stops him from mangling another of their mum's beloved marigolds. "Ron." He looks at her, blinking slightly as if surprised to still see her there. He grimaces, shaking his head. It's strange the way things aren't always what they seem, innit? It's really the last thing she expects to hear from him, but so close to her own thoughts these days that she can't help the feeling of kinship. "Except Malfoy," she says, "a peace offering of sorts. One thing they can agree on." He doesn't react right away, as if expecting a trap, but then a smile slowly spreads over his face. "Yeah," he says. He's pretty much exactly the git he seems. They laugh together, and for a moment it's like that last year when it was just the two of them left at the burrow. His shoulder bumps hers, and she kicks her feet out, leaning back on her arm next to him. They sit like that for a while, just enjoying the sun, chore momentarily forgotten. Ginny glances up at the white ball of fluff that is never far from Ron's side these days, much to his seeming annoyance. He still hasn't explained how the bird managed to just randomly adopt him. "Have you named your owl yet?" Ron glances up, automatically scowling at the owl. "No." She peers at the owl for a moment, pretending to think hard. "Pigwidgeon." "What?" he asks, frowning at her. "Pigwidgeon," she repeats. "It's perfect." The owl chirps and loops above Ron's head in approval. "Pigwidgeon," he repeats in horror. He glances up at the owl nearly vibrating with pleasure above them. "Bloody hell, Gin." Ginny laughs, pushing to her feet and tripping down the slope of the garden, the newly christened owl hooting in her wake. She doesn't stumble. Third year. There is only 1 week left of summer when Molly Weasley finally notices her daughter's tattoo. Ginny had just begun to feel like maybe she'd got away with it. She'd made a trip down to Ottery St. Catchpole at the beginning of the summer, wandering into the Muggle corner shop with a stolen handful of her father's Muggle currency. Foundation, the potion-like substance was called. She'd grown complacent, between her long sleeves and the sticky flesh-colored substance. The weather has turned hot though, the sheen of sweat on her skin betraying the green lines as she reaches for the butter. All movement at the table stops until Molly Weasley shrieks, "Ginevra Weasley, what is that?" Fred and George are the first out their seats, sending her awed looks back over their shoulders as they go, as if she has pulled off the greatest single piece of misbehavior ever. Percy clucks his tongue in disapproval and goes straight upstairs, mumbling something sanctimonious about cauldron thickness as he flees. Only Ron hesitates, as if their newly forged truce requires it, but no amount of sibling accord can stand in the face of Molly Weasley at full volume. He shoots her an apologetic glance and ducks out into the garden after the twins. Ginny doesn't see any point in bluffing at this point, lifting her chin and letting her sleeve fall further back. "It's a tattoo," she says calmly, or petulantly, more like, the words tumbling out as if saying that only an idiot wouldn't know that. Her father's eyes narrow at her tone, but Mum jumps in before he can get a word in edgewise. The ear-splitting complaints range from unladylike and long-term consequences to irresponsibility, and had she completely lost her mind? Ginny lets the rant wash over her, reflecting that howlers really have nothing on her mum. She takes a moment as her ears ring to be thankful for the acres of space around their house, and the fact that neither Hermione nor Harry have arrived yet. The last thing she needs is an audience for this. It only becomes unbearable when she makes the mistake of glancing at her father, finding him staring at her pale-faced as if she is a stranger, like she has disappointed him in some fundamental way she doesn't even understand. Her own expression falters, bravado leaking away. She blinks back against the unexpected prick of tears, tugging at the edge of her sleeve. The words are on the tip of her tongue now, "It wasn't my choice and you don't understand." Ginny looks away. She's not going to blame someone else for it, not when it had been her own damn fault. "You are staying home from the Quidditch match," Mum yells. Ginny's mouth drops open, discomfort forgotten. "Mum." Only Dad's hand on her shoulder keeps Ginny from beginning to shriek in indignation herself. They can't not let her go to the World Cup. They can't. "Ginny," Dad says, voice quiet and infinitely calm in the face of Mum's ringing anger. "Please go outside while your mother and I discuss this." Ginny stomps outside, leaving her parents to discuss their most wayward child. With an irritated huff, she sinks down on the top step. Ron comes to stand next to her after a while, staring out over the pasture. "Who?" he asks. Ron may be stupid and clueless about a lot of things, but he's close enough in age to know that second years rarely come up with the idea of tattooing themselves on their own. Ginny folds her arms around her knees, pulling them up into her chest. Ron's mouth tightens, pressing into a thin line, and she knows she doesn't even have to say the name. "Right," he says. He goes back inside, closing the door with enough careful deliberation that Ginny winces. She can't help but think she's thrown another log onto an already raging fire. Underscore 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 underscore. There's no more talk of tattoos and punishments, but mostly only because Hermione arrives the next afternoon. Ginny is relieved to see her. Not because they are close friends or anything, but because Hermione's brought her parents along the first evening, so Ginny knows there won't be any more scenes. Her mum can continue to slam food down in front of Ginny and level her most disappointed stares, but she won't yell. They have to be pleasant in front of the nervous muggles, prove that leaving their daughter here for the rest of the summer isn't a completely crazy idea. It's Hermione's first time here, so while the adults have tea in the parlor, Ron takes Hermione around on a tour. Ginny watches him as he leads her around, his eyes wary as if scared of what she'll think of the place. Right up until Hermione nearly crawls into a bush trying to get a closer look at a garden gnome. Then she watches Ron shove his hands into his pockets as he watches Hermione, shaking his head in seeming exasperation. Ginny doesn't miss the smile hiding underneath. At dinner, Ginny ends up sitting next to Mr. Granger. In many ways he looks exactly like she'd expect a muggle to. He's wearing a nice suit and button-up shirt that manages to not look anywhere near as fussy as Percy's ministry get-ups these days. He cuts his food into small, even pieces and chews thoughtfully, even when he's trying to pretend he hasn't seen Mum float more rolls over from the pantry. Ginny would expect her father to keep Mr. Granger busy with an endless litany of embarrassing questions, but tonight he's oddly quiet. Enough so that Mr. Granger looks a little lonely with only his plate to entertain him. Ginny takes a careful sip of water and asks Mr. Granger what exactly a dentist is. Mr. Granger smiles and explains his job in simple terms, not like she's stupid, but more like he's gratified by her curiosity. He tries to make a joke that goes way over her head, though to judge from Hermione's expression, it probably wasn't funny even if it hadn't. Ginny smiles anyway, noticing the way Mrs. Granger looks at her husband with exasperated affection, something she's seen on her mother's face her entire life. Ginny decides that Mr. Granger is probably a pretty good father. When it's time to clear the table, Ginny takes Mr. Granger's plate, finding her dad watching her as she does. Later that evening, he pokes his head in Ginny's room as she and Hermione are going to bed. "Do you have everything you need, girls?" "Yes," Hermione says. "Thank you, Mr. Weasley." Dad smiles at her, patting the foot of the camp bed a bit awkwardly before moving over to Ginny's bedside. His fingers fiddle with her covers, and Ginny wants to remind him that he hasn't tucked her in for years, but lets him do it all the same. He sits on the edge of her bed and lowers his voice. "Your mother and I decided that you can still go to the match." Ginny's heart leaps up into her throat. "Thank you," she says, throwing herself at him and hugging him. Thank you, thank you." His arms tighten around her. Underscore 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 underscore. Ginny Weasley is at the World Cup. The World Cup. Watching the final match between Bulgaria and Ireland. It's the most exciting thing that has ever happened to her. She supposes there was a time she would have thought first laying eyes on the famous Harry Potter was more exciting, but she's not quite that young and silly anymore. And besides, he's standing next to her, gaping around at the stadium with as much awe as she feels. She never thought she could be lucky enough to see the Quidditch match to end all Quidditch matches in person. Bill and Charlie are no doubt still green with envy, stuck as they are abroad. They were even more jealous when they heard their seats are in the top box along with the ministers. This is the part Percy seems to care the most about, Quidditch a mere afterthought. Ginny can't help but think that Charlie would have appreciated it all so much more. As for Ginny, she would have been content to sit on the grass far, far below and break her neck trying to squint up at the distant players streaking above. Anything just to be near this match and these players. The box and its illustrious inhabitants are more distraction than bonus. It's bigger than the bloody burrow, Ron mutters, tinkering with the set of omniculars Harry bought him. "I imagine most things are," a snide voice remarks. "It seems they are to have company in the top box." Ron, Harry, and Hermione turn on the newly arrived Draco Malfoy almost as a unit, and it's hard to say which face betrays the greatest amount of animosity among the four of them. Draco hasn't come alone, however, his parents a few steps behind. Ginny feels her body go cold. Lucius Malfoy's eyes sweep across them, not lingering on Ginny as he makes some snide remark to her father that she can't quite make out over the buzzing building in her ears. When Mr. Malfoy does turn his attention away from her dad, it's only to stare at Hermione like she's a bug, a disgusting smell he just walked past. Mudblood. Ginny flinches, but Hermione holds firm, refusing to look away from the frank stare Mr. Malfoy is giving her. Ron and Harry have already tensed, ready to jump into the fray, but it's Ginny who finds herself shuffling closer to Hermione as if to shield her somehow. Like she could do anything against a full-grown wizard, and an evil one at that. She really accomplishes nothing more than drawing attention to herself. Mr. Malfoy's eyes land on her like he's only just noticed her, like it even takes him a minute to figure out who she is. She is nothing to him. Less than that. It's a painful realization, this evidence of just how casually he condemned her to Tom Riddle's ceaseless whisper years before without giving her a second thought. "Ah, yes," he says, his eyes glacial. "The youngest Weasley. You play Quidditch with Draco, if I recall." He glances up at her father. "In Slytherin." His lips curl as if this fact fundamentally proves something. Ginny wonders if it does. Her dad's hand presses down on her shoulder, warm and comforting. "We're very proud of her," he says, an edge of fierceness under his calm tone. "She's said to be the best player on her team, despite her age." Draco flushes, his father's lips pulling back from his teeth with distaste. She wonders if he is more pained by the slight to his son, or the fact that he can't really defend his woeful Quidditch skills. Harry unexpectedly pipes in. "She's brilliant," he agrees, though it's probably more a dig at Draco than a compliment to her. Ludo Bagman blunders in then before things can become more tense, his glistening, childlike face split wide with excitement. "Let's get the match started," he says with a clap of his hands. Ginny turns and blindly heads for the front of the box, leaning hard against the railing. Staring down over the writhing crowd, she lets the swoop of vertigo shake the crawling itch of the Malfoy's presence off her skin. "Ginny?" Hermione asks, appearing next to her and looking for all the world as if there aren't people who hate her standing a few feet away. Ginny wants to know how she can do that. "Here come the mascots," Ron shouts, pointing. In the rush to get the best view, Ginny ends up wedged in between Harry and Hermione, enveloped in the group. It feels surprisingly nice. Once the match starts, the noise of the crowd is deafening, even in the top box. Ginny forgets Malfoy's glare boring into her back in the face of the glitter and energy and soaring excitement of the two best Quidditch teams in the world squaring off against each other. She won't let them ruin this. The Bulgarian Seeker drops in a dive unlike anything she has ever seen before, and she and Harry are plastered up to the rail side by side, knuckles white. "Did you see that?" she shrieks. Harry lets out a whoop. "I know. That was amazing." His shoulder remains pressed against her the rest of the game, the hum of excitement from his body like the feel of a broom under her palms. Hermione occasionally grabs Ginny's other arm, tugging on it with an excited squeal. Ginny bounces in her toes and lets out a shout as Moran swoops and feints, sliding the quaffle home with an aching sort of grace. Yes, Ginny thinks. One day this will be me. The moment the match ends, everything becomes a blur of Quidditch stars and trophies and celebrations. They talk it out for hours after, just how Crumb pulled off that move, how he had been brave enough to end the game on his own terms. Hermione looks on with bemusement while Fred and George dance triumphant jigs around Ron. Harry leans across Ginny, his hand cutting a tight arc through the air as if to work out the specifics of a new technique. He half trips over a root in his eagerness, and Ginny laughs as she grabs his arm to steady him. "You may need to work on that one," she comments. Harry shoots her a sheepish grin and joins in with Fred and George's mocking serenade of Ron. Leaning her head back to look at the stars, Ginny thinks this must be one of those perfect moments that should be bottled up in a little glass jar and kept forever. Too perfect. She's barely managed to close her eyes and dream of heart-stopping dives and the feel of a warm arm next to hers when screams and chaos shatter the night, sweeping them all up into a nightmare. Wedged between Fred and George in the pitch black, Ginny feels just how small she is, the sweep of panicked crowds on either side as the faceless wizards torture the muggles like a little kid pulling the legs off a spider. She grips her wand in her pocket, but knows her small catalogue of hexes won't save her. She stares up at the skull and snake floating in the air like a stain and tries to remember to breathe. Even when dawn comes, everyone safely back home and away from the danger, it feels like something has changed, like the chaos was a signal the grown-ups were just waiting for. Death Eaters. Ginny feels it in the way they look at her. There's never been a witch or wizard who went bad that didn't come from Slytherin. They're all thinking it. They just aren't brave enough to say it. And isn't that ironic? She takes the stairs 2 at a time and disappears up into her room. Underscore 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 underscore. Ginny's room feels like an oven. It's like the weather is doing its best to add to the already tense atmosphere. In some small attempt to cool down, she's wrestling her hair up into a ponytail. Hermione eases into the room like she's going to apologize yet again for taking up some of Ginny's precious space, a dance they already played the first night. Everything feels reset though now, like nothing can be taken for granted. Ginny isn't so stupid not to know why. She'd finally worked it out, that horrified stare her father had given her upon first seeing her tattoo, finally understood as she stared up at a green stain in the sky with screams of fear on all sides. She knows why he'd watched so closely as she spoke to Mr. Granger. Even if she'd somehow managed to forget it, here it is again on Hermione's face as she stares at Ginny's exposed tattoo. Ginny drops her arms, cursing that she hadn't thought to wear long sleeves despite the crushing heat. Hermione doesn't say anything, slipping into her camp bed. Ginny douses the light and follows suit. They don't say goodnight. Ginny isn't sure how much time passes, just feels thoughts and unspoken words heavy in the air between them. "I don't agree with them," Ginny blurts when she can't stand it anymore. She keeps her eyes trained on the anemic flutter of the curtains above her. "Just so you know." Hermione doesn't ask what she doesn't agree with, or even whom. Slytherins. Death Eaters. Are they the same? Ginny's scared to look for differences and not find any. The memories of careless and cutting words are far too clear. Sticks and stones, she thinks. Hermione still hasn't said anything, and Ginny begins to hope that maybe she's asleep and they won't have to have this conversation. She chances a glance. Hermione's eyes are wide open as she stares at the ceiling, sweat plastering strands of hair to her forehead. I didn't assume, Hermione starts to say. I mean, it doesn't. Really, it's not. Ginny flinches with each unfinished, fractured thought. Hermione lets out a frustrated breath and swings her feet to the ground. It's hot, she announces, like this is root of all the world's problems. Ginny feels the bizarre urge to laugh, biting down on a snide remark about the brilliant deduction. Did you read about that in Hogwarts, a history? Hermione gives Ginny a wry glance. Ginny has to remember that Hermione is perfectly familiar with the Weasley temperament. I could braid your hair, Ginny says. Hermione looks surprised. It would be cooler, Ginny explains. Okay, Hermione says, holding her gaze, and it feels like more than a simple agreement. They sit near the windowsill, bodies turned towards the non-existent breeze. Ginny clumsily works through plaits of Hermione's hair and waits for Hermione to speak. She swears she can hear the thoughts clanking around in Hermione's head. I don't like brooms, Hermione announces after a while. Ginny frowns. She leans to one side, noticing that Hermione is staring hard at a poster of Quenock Jones. It's possible she's trying to apologize for not being as into Quidditch as the rest of them are. Harry and Ron must give her a hard time about that from time to time. I see, Ginny says. Lack of interest in Quidditch may be unfathomable to Ginny, but it's hardly a capital offense. Do you? Hermione asks, turning her head. She doesn't so much look embarrassed or apologetic as determined. I'm supposed to be brave, aren't I? But I'm terrified of brooms. Ginny feels her chest tighten, like someone just chucked a quaffle into her solar plexus. Ginny? Hermione asks, trying to turn further around and wincing. Ginny realizes her fingers are tightened in Hermione's hair. She forces her hands to relax. Well, Ginny says, swallowing past the thickness in her throat. While we're confessing things, there's something about me you should probably know. Yeah? Hermione says warily. Yeah. I'm completely rubbish at braiding. Hermione blinks, looking like an owl, before she laughs. Breathing out, Ginny finishes Hermione's terrible, crooked braid. They sit on the sill together until the moon rises up and out of sight, a cool breeze finally fighting its way up over the pond. Underscore 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 underscore. September the 1st is always a day of chaos in the burrow. Mum is flitting back and forth between rooms and the kitchen and the washing lines out in the yard as usual. But as Ginny packs the last few things in her trunk, Mum is moving around her room, straightening her bedding even though it's already been made and remade twice. Ginny recognizes hovering when she sees it. Fred and George come in to help Hermione get her trunk down the stairs, leaving just Ginny and her still fiddling mother. Mum? Ginny dares to ask. Things have been less frosty between them since Ginny almost got herself trampled by dark wizards, but no less strained. What? She says, seeming surprised to find them alone. Oh, yes. She compulsively straightens the pillows on Ginny's bed again. I'm almost done, Ginny says. Good. She looks like she wants to say something more, but instead pulls something out of the pocket of her apron. She presses a cool jar into Ginny's hand. Secrecy salve, she says, looking awkward. It will work much better than that muggle makeup. Ginny wants to say she's sorry, but she doesn't even know what she's apologizing for anymore. Mum gives her a brief squeeze and disappears out into the hall. Ginny tucks the jar safely into her trunk. underscore 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 Hogwarts. She's glad to be back, ready to throw herself into things that are simple and predictable, like classes and Quidditch. Even the confusing minefield that is her house's common room offers a sort of familiarity at least. This she can handle. Only Hogwarts decides to do to her what it does best, pulls the rug out from under her feet. There isn't going to be any Quidditch this year. Just 2 more class loads of strangers to be wary of and an archaic tournament she can't participate in anyway. Honor and glory. She's more interested in surviving. Next to her, Flint's fist smacks the table, a goblet of pumpkin juice jumping. What a fucking waste. Ginny flinches, but reminds herself that this is even worse for him in some ways, being a 7th year and the team captain. That would piss her off too. I take it you aren't going to put your name in the goblet, she says. He glances over at her as if surprised to see her. He lets out a humorless huff of air. Yeah, 6. I think that's pretty safe to say. His brow furrows, and Ginny can feel herself changing in his eyes from chaser to useless 3rd year. He pushes to his feet. See you around, Weasley, he says, moving down to the table to talk to some other 7th years. Just like that, she's back to square one. Another first night spent lying in bed staring at her curtains with a long year stretching ahead of her. Only then Smitar climbs up on the foot of Ginny's bed, clearly not willing to be put off by the black cloud hanging over Ginny's head. She's cut her hair, the dark strands now curling just below her chin. How was your summer, she asks. Ginny shakes her head, only able now to think how it ended. The good days faded from memory. A disaster. You. Smitar's nose crinkles with distaste. Cousins. Lots of them. They stare at each other a moment, expressions perfectly mirroring long-suffering annoyance. Then Smitar's lip twitches, and Ginny starts to laugh. Laughs long and hard until her stomach begins to ache with something other than disappointment. They draw the curtains and sit in the cocoon of Ginny's bed, talking until the wee hours of the morning, Smitar's weight heavy against her legs. Ginny decides that maybe square one won't be quite so bad after all. Underscore 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 underscore. For a while, classes and new subjects are substitute enough for Quidditch. Smitar is still trying to convince Ginny that ancient runes was a much better choice than care of magical creatures. Despite how much she'd love to be outdoors, Ginny is convinced enough when other students in their year start appearing back in the castle with singed fingers and sooty faces. At least Professor Babbling's lessons rarely lead to physical injury. Besides, as much as Ginny hates to admit it, runes are pretty interesting. In exchange, Ginny strong-armed Smitar into Muggle studies for their 2nd elective. Probably because she knows it will make her dad happy and she's looking forward to having things to write to him about. Things he can relate to. Professor Burbage pulls her aside at the end of the first day of class. You're Arthur Weasley's daughter, aren't you? Ginny looks up into her smooth, kind face and nods. Yes, Professor. She smiles. Would you tell him hello for me? We did a great deal of work together on the Muggle Protection Act. He's a very dedicated, very kind man. Of course, Professor Ginny says, feeling her face flush. She knows her father isn't a ministry big shot. Far from it, really. She isn't embarrassed by that, she's just heard her mother complain far too often over the years that he doesn't get the credit he deserves. Dad doesn't seem to care, but it still makes Ginny feel warm inside to hear someone say such nice things about him, to see the things Ginny admires in him. Burbage touches her arm. I'm glad you're taking my class, Miss Weasley. She says this like she knows exactly why Ginny is here, knows it has less to do with her father than she'd like to think. Ginny gnaws on her lip, and mumbles something about not wanting to be late for her next class. Burbage doesn't single her out again, or treat her any differently than any of the other students, and Ginny's glad. She decides she likes Burbage, who talks about muggles not like they are the enemy or even wayward pets, but people. Though Ginny still isn't convinced those area plane things muggles travel around in can possibly be safe. She'll stick to brooms and flu powder, thank you very much. There's only one other Slytherin in the class with them, a boy called Tobias. Despite the fact that Ginny and Smita have had all their classes with him since first year, they've never spoken. In the end, he's the one to approach them. Class has just ended, the typical chatter of post-lecture freedom filling the room. Tobias leans a hip against the edge of Ginny's desk, his sandy hair falling into his eyes. They all want to know what the heir of Slytherin is doing taking Muggle studies, in case you're wondering, he announces. Ginny's trying to figure out if he is mocking her or if people honestly still associate her with the chamber. She glances around at the other students, most of them looking hastily away. She feels her face flush. What, this isn't the class where we learn how best to season muggles before we eat them, she snaps. A few heads nearby whip around so fast that Ginny worries for their necks. Tobias simply looks surprised, his eyebrows lifting. No, he says with calm seriousness. I think that must be some other class. Ginny blinks at him, wondering what his problem is. It's annoying to realize she's just as confused by his presence in this class as the others are about hers. What other elective are you two taking, he asks. The care and tenderizing of magical creatures. His lips twitch, and Ginny realizes he's trying really hard not to laugh. Merlin, Ginny curses, shaking her head and letting out a breath. Smita's eyes widen. She didn't mean dot. He knows, Smita, Ginny says, touching her arm. He's just having a nice go at us. Teasing her, really. And not the vicious kind she would expect. It's kind of confusing. Tobias presses his hand against his chest like he's taking some sort of oath, and she's beginning to wonder if he's incapable of taking anything seriously. I would never. He jerks his head towards the door. Come on. Maybe we'll learn something useful about basting in potions. Ginny rolls her eyes, but grabs her books and follows Tobias out into the hall. I suppose we are all going the same place. That's the spirit, Tobias says, holding the door open for Smita. We poor, outnumbered Slytherins need to stick together, after all. Ginny frowns, wondering what he means by that, but his attention has already turned to asking Smita if she thinks Muggle pets can really be as useless as they sound. To Ginny's surprise, Smita quirks her head and starts telling them both about a dog her father had as a child that her Muggle grandfather had taught to carry in the newspaper each morning. She isn't quite sure which shocks her most, that Smita isn't a pureblood, aren't all Slytherins supposed to be purebloods, or that she's talking with Tobias. Chatting, even. When they get to potions, Tobias leaves them to join his friends across the dungeon, and Smita notices the look on her face. What? Ginny stows her bag and pulls out her cauldron, a grin playing at her lips. Nothing. Nothing at all. Underscore 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 underscore. The weeks begin to slide by with greater and greater speed. Ginny still misses Quidditch more than she can properly express, feels a little lost without it. But she likes her classes and she has Smita to talk to. Even Tobias is pretty amusing from time to time, when he isn't being a complete Burke. Though by the time the Durmstrang and Bosbaton students arrive at the end of October, Ginny is already sick of the Triwizard Tournament. It's all people have been talking about for weeks, and she thinks if she hears the phrase honor and glory one more time she's going to lose it. Though seeing her brothers get knocked back by the Goblets age line sporting matching grandfather beards is almost worth all the fuss and bother. Almost. Only then things take a turn for the worse. Sitting in the Great Hall on Halloween, Ginny thinks that she should have seen this coming, Harry Potter getting himself swept up in the middle of everything, rules be damned. For about half a second she believes it. Believes Harry Potter has been stupid and brash and arrogant enough to bend all the rules to his fame. But then she turns to stare at him like everyone else. She sees it, the way he flinches back as if wishing he could melt into the very woodwork itself. This isn't guilt, Ginny recognizes, having seen more than her fair share of it growing up. It's something more like terror. It makes her think of a battered boy staring across ink-stained stones at her, the feel of a shoulder against hers as brooms sped through the air. Harry sends a panicked look to Ron as he flounders, but her brother is looking at the floor, his ears tinged red enough to be seen all the way from where Ginny is sitting. Hermione has to shove Harry to get him moving. He looks so small, walking up the aisle towards Dumbledore between the rows of fully grown Beauxbatons and Durmstrang students. Ginny bites down on her lip and watches his progress, trying to pretend that she doesn't see that Dumbledore looks more worried than a wizard of his power and position has the right to. Once Harry disappears out the door after the other champions, the hall erupts into chatter, Harry's name floating above the din with varying levels of sharpness and venom. Cheater, they call him. Glory hound. Full of himself. Even Rita Skeeter talks about him like that in the papers. They don't know the real Harry, Ginny thinks, remembering the boy tripping over his own feet in his excitement over something as simple as Quidditch, the way his eyes still grow large over things she's long since learned to take for granted. He may be a lot of things, but she can't quite picture him doing this on purpose. Over the next weeks, she watches from afar as Harry is ostracized, turned into a walking pariah. She watches the way he tries to pretend it doesn't bother him, knowing with absolute certainty that the other students' vicious scorn is nothing to him next to the desertion of her stupid brother. She remembers the look on Ron's face as he first showed Hermione around the burrow. His utter dismay at moldy old dress robes as Harry stood nearby with a brand new set. She'd always silently wondered what it would be like, having someone like Harry Potter as a best friend. Oh, she understands her brother perfectly well. Well enough to know that no word from her will change anything, or make him understand that abandoning his best mate because of his festering jealousy doesn't make him a hero, just a wanker. So Ginny doesn't talk to Ron, just walks in the grounds with Hermione occasionally, letting her vent her spleen about the stupidity of boys. She looks exhausted, spending all her time running back and forth between Harry and Ron like an overworked owl. So much so that Ginny wants to smack some sense into both boys. Or hex them. She still hasn't decided. I worry about him, Hermione confesses once between classes. Ron? Ginny asks, thinking of her brother's pale and set face, the way he walks around like he's beginning to suspect he wandered down the wrong path but refuses to admit it. Hermione shakes her head. Harry. I think he's terrified, but refuses to admit it. Any more than he'll admit that he misses Ron like an amputated arm. She gives Ginny a shaky smile. They're rather pathetic without each other. Ginny tries to smile back, thinking that Hermione isn't any happier herself. 2 days later, Draco's stupid badges appear, and Ginny's had enough. She tells Smita that she'll catch up with her and slips down a different hallway. It doesn't take her long to find him, particularly with the swath of open space that seems to float around him these days. When she gets close enough, she makes a grab for Harry's sleeve. She tries not to notice the way his eyes track to her robes as if expecting to see Potter stinks blazoned there. She can't blame him for that, not really. It hasn't been all that long since she walked the halls trailing after Draco, forced laughter on her lips. Ginny, he asks, eyes guarded. Trained to expect the worst from all sides, she thinks. She takes a careful breath, jaw tightening. Ron's a prat. Harry's eyebrows shoot up in surprise, as if this is the last thing he expects to hear from her. But he'll figure it out eventually, she promises. He always does. This is what she needs Harry to understand. That her brother, for all his stupidity, is also honorable to a fault. Harry tries to smile, but it's just a grimace, and she doesn't blame him. You think so? He asks, the tiniest painful bit of hope hiding under his forced humor. Inexplicably, she feels the urge to give him a slap get replaced with the bizarre impulse to hug him. He is rather pathetic. Instead she squeezes his arm, giving him a bracing grin. Good luck on the first task. I know you'll do brilliantly. He doesn't seem quite as optimistic, but still manages a grateful look. Thanks, Ginny. She watches him go, knowing she hasn't fixed anything, but hoping maybe he feels a tiny bit better. That maybe Hermione won't have to worry quite as much. Or a mocking voice drawls. I think little Weasley has a crush. Ginny turns, colliding with Draco. Her face flushes, half with anger, half with the embarrassing memory of a stupid little girl struck speechless and clumsy by the very sight of Harry Potter. Draco seems to take this as all the confirmation he needs. The Weasleys' support of Harry is no secret after all. His eyes dart down to her robe, something flinty and frightening taking up residence there. "You've forgotten your badge." "No, I really haven't," Ginny snaps. She moves to shove past him, but Crabbe and Goyle step across her. Draco fingers his wand. "Maybe you'd like something a little more permanent." He grabs her right hand, twisting to expose her wrist. A matching pair, perhaps. Her first year, as unspoken head honcho of the younger students, Draco mostly ignored her. She thinks maybe that was a matter of demonstrating daily that she wasn't even worth his notice. Her second year things changed, her mystique rising in tandem with the Chamber of Secrets scandal and her position on the Quidditch team. But when she had subtly shown that she was not going to be in his pocket, the silent war had begun. This year, Draco does not seem content with the silent part. She doesn't have Quidditch to lord over him anymore, and he's more than aware of it. All term he's been talking loudly about Ginny's poor family and Muggle-loving father, his stage whisper echoing through the common room. Did everyone hear that she's taking Muggle studies? Pathetic. And what has she done about his verbal attacks? Nothing. Ron, Fred, George, even Harry, they would have already drawn their wands, flown across the room to shut Draco up any way they could. She hasn't. She isn't her brothers. That probably makes her a coward. Not a Gryffindor, at the very least. Draco's hand tightens around her wrist. "What do you say, Weasley?" She wrenches away from him as hard as she can, his nails raking against her skin as she escapes. Ducking her head, she dives into the swarm of students, the sound of their laughter following after her. Underscore 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 underscore. Ginevra, a voice drawls. "Is that a love letter?" Ginny looks up from her dad's latest letter describing a new plug he'd found at something the Muggles call a swap meet. Though what meat has to do with electricity, she still doesn't know. She'll have to ask Burbage. Tobias, sprawled on the common room floor with an acre of notes spread around him, is waggling his eyebrows at Ginny. She rolls her eyes. "Oh, yes. It's from Heathcote Barberry. He wants to take me on tour with him." Tobias snorts. "Thought you had better musical taste than that." Looking back up over his shoulder, he nudges Smithar on the couch behind him. "How can you be friends with her?" Smithar bites her lower lip like she's fighting off a smile and buries her face in her runes book. Tobias and Ginny share a grin. It seems to have become one of Tobias' greatest ambitions, trying to get Smithar to laugh. Ginny wishes him luck with that insurmountable task. Turning back to her letter, Ginny is interrupted yet again when a badge flies across the room, bouncing off her chest before landing on her lap. "Potter stinks," it announces. She feels her smile fade. Draco has been quieter in the common room since a seventh year grew tired of his heckling and told him to shut it. But that just means he's always finding new ways to torment her. Ginny brushes the button off her lap and goes back to her letter as if nothing happened. Smithar sighs. "I wish he'd just give it up." Tobias picks up the badge, turning it over in his fingers. "Yeah, well," he says, the badge disappearing into his pocket. "The bloke has to have a hobby." Ginny wishes he'd find a different one. "Anyway," Tobias says, scooping up the papers and getting to his feet. "Thanks for letting me look at your notes, Smithar." He passes her a giant stack of parchment covered with her careful writing. To Ginny's endless fascination, Smithar's face flushes the slightest bit red. "Sure," she says. "Any time." Tobias smiles at her, one of his hands scratching at his neck. "Yeah, well, I don't plan on getting the firepox again anytime soon." The blush on Smithar's face deepens, her mouth dropping open. "Oh. I didn't mean dot." Tobias' grin widens. "Course you didn't." Ginny snorts, both of them turning to look at her. "What?" Tobias says. "Nothing," Ginny says. "Nothing at all." Tobias' eyes narrow at her, promising later retribution. Ginny just smiles pleasantly back. Tobias shakes his head in defeat. "See you later," he says, abandoning the girls for his more macho guy friends, no doubt. She watches him cross the common room, her eyes straying over Draco. He leers at her, and Ginny lifts her letter, the words swimming in front of her. Underscore 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 underscore. At the first challenge, Ginny has to rethink her indifference to the Triwizard Tournament. It may still be a giant imposition and nowhere near as important as Quidditch, but it isn't a total joke. Not to judge from the 4 enormous dragons waiting to eviscerate the champions. They can't be serious, Ginny says, trying very hard not to think of how small Harry looks from the top of the stands. Brilliant, Tobias breathes, looking positively giddy at the prospect of carnage. Scimitar doesn't offer a comment, just fists her hands against her mouth, eyes wide over her knuckles. Despite Ginny's misgivings, Cedric and Crumb and Fleur do credible jobs. There are only 2 or 3 times she's certain someone is going to lose an arm. She's only slightly disappointed not to see the glamorous Bose-Baton's champion lose some of that shiny perfect hair of hers in a stray flash of dragon breath. By the time it's Harry's turn, Ginny's posture closely mirrors Scimitar's. Fortunately, Harry doesn't get torn apart or reduced to a Harry-shaped column of ash, but instead faces his dragon, the biggest, meanest one, she's sure, with a blinding sort of courage that she can't help but admire, almost as much as she admires the way his broom becomes an extension of his body. She wonders if he misses Quidditch too, or if he's too busy with the not dying and people glaring at him in the halls to bother. She sees Ron and Harry later, arms strung across each other's shoulders, hands thumping each other's backs in that jubilant way boys have. Like there'd never been a breach between them. Hermione walks a few paces behind them, Ginny catching her eye as they pass. Hermione rolls her eyes in exasperation at Harry and Ron, the censure softened by the brilliant smile on her lips. "Boys," she seems to say. Ginny shrugs her shoulders in commiseration and turns back to Tobias and Scimitar, who are still madly debating the scores assigned by the judges. Rather, Tobias is madly debating, Scimitar only occasionally disagreeing. Tobias throws his arms up. No way Potter should have gotten that many points. He used the simplest spell ever. No one else thought of it though, did they? Scimitar counters. Besides, you have to admit he flew very well. Tobias frowns. Yeah. I suppose so. But I still say Fleur had the best technique. He gets a stupid grin on his face. Scimitar doesn't glare exactly, just gets this look on her face like maybe she wishes Fleur had gotten a bit more singed as well. Ginny slows her steps and lets them get ahead of her as the crowds stream up towards the castle. Scimitar has never said anything, but Ginny isn't stupid. This is how she ends up alone when Draco ambushes her. He shouts a spell she doesn't know, something hitting her in the back like a gong, vibrating unpleasantly through her bones. It doesn't particularly hurt, so she doesn't immediately panic. Not until she tries to turn and face her attackers and realizes she can't. She's completely immobilized, from toes to throat, her body frozen as if encased in ice. It's the worst thing she has ever felt. Draco circles around in front of her, standing much too close. "You think you can pull one over on me, Weasley?" he hisses, holding up a badge. In her panic, it takes her eyes a while to adjust to what he's trying to show her. The badge no longer says Harry Potter stinks. It's now stuck saying Draco Malfoy is an inbred tosser. Her eyes widen, not so much at the insult as the livid lines of Draco's face as it occurs to her that she's utterly helpless. She never wanted to feel this again. Pathetic. "Is there a problem here?" a calm voice asks. Ginny's tormentors look up to see Professor Snape approaching, and Draco drops his wand. Ginny feels her limbs soften and relax and wants to cry with the relief of it. Just practicing for charms, Draco lies, clearly comfortable in his assumption that their head of house will choose his side. Sure enough, Snape gives him an indulgent smile that makes Ginny's teeth ache. "I'm in your house too," she wants to say. Snape's eyes flit over her, catch, and then almost linger. "Is there something you wish to add, Miss Weasley?" Draco gives her a threatening glance from behind Snape's back. She clenches her jaw, not sure which of them she hates more in that moment. No, sir. Snape nods, black eyes glittering. Then why don't you move along? Draco and his cronies saunter off, and Ginny watches them go, willing her heartbeat back to a normal rhythm. She's not sure if it's fear or anger that is making her legs shake, but with Snape still there watching her, she forces herself to start walking, legs be damned. Snape follows a few paces behind her all the way back up to the castle, as if he doesn't even trust her to do that properly. Miss Weasley, he says as she splits off in the entryway. She turns back to look at him, not bothering to hide her blazing anger. Yes, sir, she asks, clipping the words short. He looks taken aback, as if he hadn't expected that sort of a response from her. But then his face clears, settling back into cool, uncaring lines, and she's sure she imagined the glimmer of something almost sad in his eyes. His chin lifts. No loitering in the halls. It takes her a moment to understand that he's chastising her, when he'd been the one to stop her in the first place. Yes, sir, she says again, spinning on her heel and disappearing down the steps. She can feel his eyes on her back as she goes. Ginny Smithar says as she enters the common room. Where did you? But she must look almost as bad as she feels, because Smithar stops talking mid-sentence and steers her to their dorm. Her hands are still shaking. Ginny spends the next 30 minutes calling Draco and Snape every dirty word she can think of. I didn't even do it, she exclaims, hands slapping down on her quilt. It's the most galling part, not that Draco had done that to her, but that she hadn't been brave enough to think of pulling the prank he'd been getting revenge for in the first place. She should have thought of it. It was Tobias, Smithar says, eyes wide and horrified. What? Ginny asks. Smithar bites her lip, shooting her an uncertain look. The badge. I'm sure he never meant for you. Ginny shakes her head. Lying down on the bed, she wraps her arms around her pillow. It doesn't matter. Smithar curls up on the foot of the bed with her, her hand tight and comforting around Ginny's ankle. Ginny starts awake the next morning with Smithar's weight heavy across her legs and a voice ghosting her ears, fading dreams of ink stains and pulling strings and limbs moving without her control. Ginny? Smithar asks, blinking sleepily up at her from the foot of the bed. Cramped Ginny lies, pulling her legs up to her chest and rubbing at her calf. Sorry, Smithar says, sitting up and grimacing as she stretches her back. The other girls in the room are stirring, and it's time to get dressed and go down for breakfast and go to class. Normal. Normal. Underscore 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 underscore. In the weeks leading up to the Yule Ball, Ginny is careful never to be caught out alone in the halls. She isn't sure what Smithar has told Tobias, but the two of them seem to slip into an unspoken sort of buddy system. Part of Ginny wants to make a caustic remark that Slytherins aren't supposed to care like that, but it seems stupid and petulant, and this is Smithar she is talking about. Even Tobias seems sobered by what happened. We Slytherin need to stick together, after all. She feels like there's supposed to be a joke in there somewhere, but she doesn't much feel like laughing. In potions, she looks up from time to time, almost certain she'll find Snape watching her. He never is. Why would he be? The night of the Yule Ball, Ginny sits up waiting for the older girls to return, wanting to listen to their stories of dancing and dresses and gossip. Maybe dream a little of a day she will be the one out late. Only the bustling group of girls returning from the party are not laughing or yawning with weary satisfaction. They sweep into the common room in a frenzy of agitation and high-pitched voices, one of their numbers cocooned in the middle. He deserves to die, one girl puts in. Even from her hiding spot, Ginny can see the angry bruises rising on the skin of the girl standing in the middle, streaks of tears on her face. Torn cloth. It takes her a moment to put it all together, to work out the pronouns against the colors. When she gets it, she feels a prickle of fear work its way down her spine. She remembers not being able to move, being completely under someone else's power. Ginny can't help but consider how fragile it is to be a girl sometimes. Suffering is so much better, another girl counters, seemingly not so much disturbed by the hypothetical murder as the limited opportunity for punishment. The other girls chime in, plans swirling around the room. How they can get on the boat, sink it, curse the doors shut for all time, each idea more vicious than the last. No, Theodora cuts across, the seventh year's voice silencing all the others. She isn't particularly tall or loud or even beautiful, isn't technically head girl, but Ginny has seen the way everyone defers to her. The way she is in charge in all the ways that matter. It will have to be public. Everyone needs to learn what happens when they try to take from a Slytherin. One girl casts a charm on everyone's faces. They aren't transformed, just blurred. Try as she might, Ginny's eyes keep sliding away from their faces like a raindrop down a window pane. With the dark hood pulled up over their heads, they look enough like Dementus that Ginny feels a thrill of fear streak down her spine. Ginny turns to find Smita sitting right next her, face a bit paler than usual, but calm all the same. I'm going, Ginny decides, knowing somehow that she needs to see this unfold. Smita swallows. Okay. You don't have to, Ginny starts to say. If you go, I go, Smita says. Ginny slips her hand into Smita's, giving it a squeeze. Hogwarts has taken a lot from her, including Quidditch, but following out after them feels a lot like flying. By the time they catch up with the older girls, they've spirited Gregor out of the Durmstrang ship. They frog march him forward to stand in front of Lisa, only recognizable by the torn hem trailing out of her robes. Is this him? One of the girls, Ginny suspects Theodora, asks, her voice harsh and distorted. What? Gregor tries to protest. One of his keepers whips out her wand, snarling, Petrificus Totalus. Gregor's body snaps upright, only his eyes still wildly swiveling. Is this the boy? Theodora repeats. There's a rustle of cloth that Ginny thinks may be a nod. It is. Did you tell him his attentions were unwanted? Lisa's hand flinches towards her shoulder. Yes. Did he listen? No. Do you swear upon your magical blood that this is true? I do. Very well. The circle of girls closes around Gregor. Ginny is 13 when she sees her first unforgivable curse up close. She knows she should be horrified, knows the punishment for these terrible crimes is a life in Azkaban, but watching the Durmstrang boy writhe and babble, beg for forgiveness, doesn't seem so much evil as well deserved. What is more unforgivable, a nasty spell or the crime this boy committed? Right. Might is right, Tom reminds her, voice cruel and cutting. Ginny and Smita watch at the girls force Gregor to write out a confession, his hands clumsy under the imperious curse. The girls then enlarge and copy and slather the walls with his words. It's only when they bind him, a rope around his neck, that Ginny shifts forward, her heart in her throat. Surely they wouldn't. Ginny surges forward as they stand him up on balcony above the entrance. Smita grabs her arm, trying to hold her back, but Ginny shakes her off. Gregor goes over the edge with a muffled squeak. Ginny must have made some noise of protest because they all turn to look at her, faces still warped and twisting, a ghostly layer hanging over their features like mist. For the tiniest moment, Ginny thinks, this is it. I'm next. But the one Ginny suspects is Theodora raises her hand, the group of girls parting as if inviting Ginny to inspect their handiwork. She isn't sure how she gets her feet moving, just swallows hard against the tightness in her throat and steps quietly through the ranks. There's a whisper as she passes, a cool breeze fluttering across her face. It takes her a moment to register that someone has disguised her. To protect her or themselves, she doesn't know. She leans over the ledge, her fingers pressing hard against the cold stone. Gregor stares up at her with wide eyes, swaying side to side from a harness tied around his waist. Terrified, but very much alive. She thinks maybe she should be horrified, that she should disapprove of this form of Slytherin cruelty. But all she feels is a grim beat of satisfaction, the corner of her mouth lifting. When she turns back around, all of the girls have disappeared. Only Smita stands in the hall, hands pressed to her mouth. Ginny scrambles over to her, grabbing her arm. Come on. Let's get out of here. It wouldn't do to be caught so close to the scene of the crime. Smita doesn't argue, letting Ginny drag her away. underscore 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 underscore. Gregor's body is found swinging over the entrance of the Great Hall the next morning, his eyes wide as he screams soundlessly against his gag. And above him, written in his own hand, is his confession. I am a pervert and a thief. I took from a Slytherin what she was not willing to give. For this I deserve to die. They'd made him believe it, too, right up until the moment the rope around his middle stopped his fall, safe, but shaken. If there needed to be any more evidence of his fear, all one had to do was look at the suspicious puddle collected right underneath him. It takes the professors almost an hour to figure out how to get Gregor down. It's another 2 weeks before the signs fade. Long enough for every student at the school to have witnessed the spectacle firsthand. As the days pass, the girls watch Ginny, eyes following her, and she suspects they are waiting to see if she is going to turn them in, going running to Snape or Dumbledore. They'll have a long time to wait. She still doesn't understand what happened that night, or how she feels about it, but she's not going to run to a teacher. Not Snape, not McGonagall. She suspects they don't have all the answers the way they want the students to think they do. In the end, there's no one to punish, not even after Gregor regains the ability to speak. He can only babble about faceless wizards in robes. This is yet another part of what it means to be Slytherin, Ginny learns. Just because they are willing to do the task doesn't mean they are willing to take the fall. It doesn't keep the boys of Hogwarts and Durmstrang alike from sliding the Slytherin girls' wary glances. Ginny feels it as she walks down the hall, the green of her uniform like a brand, a warning. For weeks, Ginny can't think of that night without a strange swooping sensation unsettling her stomach. She doesn't think it's fear, but something else entirely. Something new and strange and somehow, incredibly right. She wonders what that says about her. In her dreams at night, Tom laughs long and hard, victory trilling in the sound. Underscore 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 underscore. The second task isn't quite as exciting as the first, though no less tense. It's just the entire school on the banks of the lake, standing around staring at the surface of the water until one by one the champions resurface, their hostages in tow. Harry's done well again, despite his best efforts to let his brain be overruled by rash bravery yet again, and as usual Draco seems to take that as a personal insult. But Harry is surrounded by admirers and well-wishers. Funny how quickly things can change, and less well-wishing reporters, and how some things don't, and Draco can't touch him. Instead it's time for his second favorite game. He walks a few paces behind Ginny all the way up to the castle, muttering insulting things under his breath the whole way. She's tense in her shoulders, but not particularly worried as they are surrounded by other students. Draco appreciates being ignored, eventually stepping across her, opening his mouth as if to lay into her yet again. Only nothing comes out. He just sort of croaks, one hand lifting to his throat. Ginny frowns, wondering what the hell is going on. Before she can think better of it, she half reaches for him to see if he's okay. He jerks back away from her, glancing down at her wand hand, still hanging empty and useless down by her side. Ginny spreads her hands wide. Whatever this is, she hasn't done it. He may try to blame it on her, but there are more than 20 witnesses to the fact that Ginny never even pulled her wand. He starts panicking in earnest then, Goyle clawing at Malfoy's throat as if to free him from something. Just when she's beginning to worry he's going to suffocate, whatever has a hold of him seems to let go, Draco gulping in giant lungfuls of air as he hangs between Crabbe and Goyle. Above the crowd, Ginny notices one of the Slytherin girls from the night of Yule Ball walking away, her long black ponytail jaunting behind her as she goes. Antonia, Ginny remembers. A 5th year. Not sparing a glance for the still gasping Draco, Ginny follows after her. She catches up just as Antonia reaches the common room. Did you do that? Antonia's eyes widen with fake innocence. Do what? Continuing ahead, she glides down the steps. Ginny wonders if she does anything less than elegantly, like her entire life is choreographed. Ginny isn't going to be put off that easily though, elegant exit or not. She's convinced now that Antonia had been behind whatever happened to Draco. The why of it is much more confusing, but she can't quite imagine asking Antonia why she'd bothered to help her, so instead she asks, "How did you do that?" Antonia turns to Ginny like a conspirator, like she'd just been waiting for the question. "You know the best part of that little spell. It's utterly untraceable. Even if someone were to inspect your wand, check prior spells, it only shows up as Accio." She laughs, flourishing her wand. "It's brilliant. Is that legal?" Ginny asks. Antonia's eyebrow lifts like this is the most ridiculous question Ginny could have ever asked. Someone else decides to answer the question. "I don't think that's what you're really trying to ask." Ginny turns to see Theodora reading near the fire, her blonde hair pulled back in a glossy, tight ponytail. Ginny glances at Antonia to gauge her reaction to this uncharacteristic interjection by the 7th year. She rarely lowers herself to the conversations of others. Antonia just smirks at Ginny, a bit like "Oh now you're in for it." "What?" Ginny's voice falters and she clears her throat. "What am I trying to ask?" Theodora presses a finger to a line in her book to keep her place. "You didn't seem to have an issue with legality the night of the Yule Ball." Ginny feels her stomach lurch. No. She really hadn't. She'd had her chance to turn them in, to raise the alarm, to do anything other than simply watch and stay silent. But it's still not the same as participating. Isn't it? "You don't really want to know if it's legal or not," Theodora says, eyes lifting to Ginny's face as if asking a question. Ginny gnaws on the inside of her lip. "I want to know if it's right," she says. "They aren't always the same," Theodora says, something just slyly superior enough in her tone to put Ginny's teeth on edge. Ginny frowns. "And who decides that?" "You." Ginny hears Antonia suck in a surprised breath behind her, but doesn't dare look back. It's very possible she's pushed too far, miscalculated, but she's not going to turn tail and run, even if she should. Her back straightens, chin lifting. Theodora surprises them both by smiling, something broad and faintly patronizing, but amused all the same. "That's the interesting part," she says, snapping her book shut and pushing to her feet. She steps closer to Ginny, towering over her by a good 5 inches. She's only 4 years Ginny's senior, but at this moment feels as if it might as well be 500. Theodora reaches out towards Ginny's face, and despite herself, Ginny flinches, not sure what to expect. Theodora's smile broadens, her fingers pausing before sliding down a strand of Ginny's hair. Leaning into Ginny, Theodora says, "You're stuck deciding that for yourself." Ginny frowns, wanting to ask more questions, but Theodora is clearly finished with the conversation. With a brief nod to Antonia, Theodora sweeps from the room, moving past a wide-eyed Scimitar standing in doorway. Antonia recovers, laughing as she pats Ginny on the shoulder. "Bloody hell," she swears under her breath, amusement tinging the words. "What was that?" Scimitar asks, watching Antonia leave. Ginny shakes her head, feeling her knees still trembling. She has no idea. Underscore 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 underscore. Charms is one of Ginny's favorite subjects. It's a little chaotic but productive, and almost every class is spent with wands in hand actually doing something, not discussing theory for hours as in transformation, or worse, the endless drone of things that happened long ago in history of magic. Scimitar prefers numbers and theory, but that's just her nature. Ginny has always preferred the doing. This year they've settled into sitting with a girl called Luna Lovergood. She's a blonde, willowy, dreamy Ravenclaw who is somehow incredibly likable in her own bizarre way. Scimitar doesn't seem to mind Luna, despite the things she says sometimes. Luna may be weird, but she's clever and takes the work seriously, unlike some of their other classmates. That's more than enough for Scimitar. Ginny likes Luna for the simple fact that she may be odd, but she's honest. Ginny likes talking with someone and knowing with absolute certainty that they mean everything coming out of their mouth, even if it is about crumple-horned snorkax or something equally crazy. It's soothing. For all they like Luna though, she's still just a passing acquaintance. They don't talk or hang out or meet to study. So when Ginny and Smita are stuck cleaning up a catastrophic cascade of ink splattered all over the walls by a rogue spell, Luna leaves with everyone else. Ginny shows Smita a useful siphoning charm she picked up from her mum, so they are able to make pretty quick work of it. By the time it's all done, the last stragglers of their class are still lingering outside. Ginny steps out into the hall just in time to hear a voice drawl, "Loony, loony love a good" in a sing-song voice, laughter echoing behind the taunt. Two boys are standing in Luna's path, blocking her way as they tease her. Ginny recognizes the blue and silver of their uniforms, identifying them as Ravenclaws. She wonders if being in the same house as Luna makes them feel like they have the right to ridicule her. It's time to walk away, to leave Luna to her own. Smita has already turned a few steps down the hall to where Tobias is waiting. Ginny's about to follow, only then one of the boys' wands lifts, twitching as if to deliver a hex to go with the stinging words. Ginny remembers with shuddering clarity the feel of her body totally immobilized. Her feet move her forward without any conscious thought. "Oh," Ginny snaps, stepping up behind the two boys. "What?" they say. The first boy blanches when he realizes who he is talking to. Not Ginny Weasley, but a Slytherin. For the first time that terrified look doesn't make Ginny feel like a monster. "Leave her alone," Ginny says. The second boy looks a little steadier, crossing his arms over his chest. Or what? There was a time she wouldn't have had the guts to stand under that challenge, would have preferred to walk away. Don't draw attention to yourself. But, damn it, she likes Luna. And this isn't right. Ginny takes a small step forward, lifting one eyebrow the way she's seen Theodora do. "Do you really want to find out?" she asks, fingers toying with her wand. It starts off as nothing but bluster, a moment of make-believe, but she realizes in that moment that she will hex him if she has to, that she has that in her. She's had years of practicing on her brothers after all, been standing up for herself her entire life. And why, oh why had she forgotten that? Why had she tried to be something different? She can do this. But Antonia's voice is in her head, cautioning Ginny that it would be better not to hex the stupid gits out here in the hall in front of so many witnesses. Ginny smiles grimly at the properly Slytherin reasoning. Her smile seems to make the bolder boy falter, just for a moment. He's not a Gryffindor, after all, not one to be fueled to stupidity by bravery. So when Smita steps up next to Ginny, Tobias by her side, the Ravenclaw boy backs away, clearly having done the maths. He scowls at her, but turns away. Smart, those Ravenclaws. The remaining students who have loitered long enough to see the outcome all turn to each other in a rush, whispers and shouts echoing against the stones as they rehash what just happened. Ginny stows her wand and turns to Luna, who has been watching the proceedings with wide-eyed placidity, as if she's wondering just what all the fuss is about. "Would you like to go down by the lake and work on our charms homework?" Ginny asks. It hurts a little bit, the way Luna beams as if she's been given the keys to some hidden paradise. "Oh, yes. That would be lovely. I've been meaning to collect more Wemberwiplies." Ginny has no idea what a Wemberwipli is, just knows that no one will dare say a thing to Luna when she's around. Not anymore. It's right. Underscore 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 underscore. Ginny grips her wand tighter and takes a cautious step closer to the object in front of her. It's a mirror, one of those tall, fancy oval ones Auntie Muriel is partial to. Only the glass on this one is scratched and foggy, and almost seems to creak, as if tiny faults were opening in the surface. More than anything, Ginny wants to turn away, to get as far from the sinister object as she can. Steeling her spine, she forces herself to step closer, centering herself on the mirror. Her reflection slides into view. Only it isn't her reflection looking back at her. Cool, angular features stare out at her from under a mop of dark hair, his deep green robes reflecting her own. "Changeling," he accuses, voice like a snake. Instinctually, Ginny lifts her hand, trying to block the image, hide it from view. His hand breaches the mirror surface, grabbing her wrist. She struggles, pulling back, but he only smiles, almost as if a proud brother. Strange likeness, he says, fingers digging into the green ink burned into her skin. Behind her, Madai says something in the distance, encouragement maybe, but more likely harsh instruction. Vigilance. Ginny shakes her head hard as if to dislodge the buzzing in her ears. I'm not like you, Tom, she wants to say. Tom smiles as if he can hear her. I made you. No. Weasley Moody growls, growing impatient. Peripherally, a whispered hum gets louder, the other students shifting around and growing curious. Looking Tom straight in the eye, Ginny grips her wand and says, ridiculous. She gives him a shock of red hair and a pair of round, black spectacles held together with white tape. He stumbles back in fury, knees caught up in the plaid skirt twining around his legs, and a laugh works its way free from Ginny's throat, the glass shattering. Strange likeness, indeed. The boggart dances back away from her, searching out a new victim to terrorize. It turns into a shark, fluid body slicing through the air like water, and Ginny steps back into the crowd of students to watch. To hide, maybe, Tom's voice still buzzing in her ears. Only not, because Tom is gone. She knows this. She's always known this, despite her clinging doubts. She is the only one here anymore, the one left wondering if he made her something she never wanted to be. She glances at the boggart, now a miniature shark doing laps in a goldfish bowl. No. Tom changed her, this she can't deny. He opened her eyes to things she would not have seen otherwise. He hardened her, made her more powerful, but no longer has the ability to manipulate her. Her actions and reasons are all her own. Her own. Who was that, some of the girls want to know after Moody has wrestled the boggart back into its wardrobe. An ex-boyfriend, they tease. Ginny laughs, the wardrobe shuddering. Something like that, she says, feeling her cheeks flush. She walks out of the room, leaving Tom locked in the stones where he belongs. Finally put in the past. Underscore 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 underscore. Harry Potter comes out of the final Triwizard Challenge with a dead body clutched in his arms, and just like that, everything changes. The grounds are in utter chaos, people shoving in panic. Ginny has long since lost hold of Smitar's hand, but knows Tobias was with her. She tries to push forward to where she last caught a glimpse of Harry, searches for the gleam of familiar red hair, the comforting profile of her mother's face. Instead she finds herself shunted back towards the stands, forced to step into the shadow under the seats to avoid being trampled. There's a break in the crowd, and she sees Draco standing across the aisle. For a moment, he looks a little lost, disconcerted among the crying, screaming crowds, the echo of Cedric and Potter and the Dark Lord gaining in intensity. Then he turns to find her watching him, his lips twisting into self-satisfaction, as if he has somehow been responsible for all of this. She remembers the tick of fear that was there first though. Mima I sit. Draco nudges the ever-present Crabbe and Goyle, gesturing towards Ginny. It's blatant intimidation. She pretends for a moment she's on her broom and this is nothing more than a Quidditch match. Even with the chaos around them, he wouldn't dare try anything on her. Would he? A hand closes on her shoulder, and she nearly jumps out of her skin. Ginny, George says, reeling her in. Fred is next to him, wand pulled and eyes on the crowd as if not sure what to expect anymore. Ginny steals a moment to glance back across the aisle, but Malfoy is gone. Come on, Gin, Fred says, pressing close to her other side. Mum wants us to wait inside. They walk her back up to the castle, veering off for the Great Hall while everyone else is still milling around outside. She can just make out the echoes of hysterical voices rising up the hill, bouncing off the stones. Inside, they settle in the neutral middle ground, taking seats at the Hufflepuff table. A whole year of school and somehow Gin is right back where everything started. Scared witless, feeling so damn small, but with her brothers pressed in on either side like a set of bookends. Over the next hours, they watch people stream by in the entrance, students to their common rooms, ministry workers and professors, and even once when the hour is very very late, a Dementor. Ginny draws back against George, feeling the frost ghost her skin, but for once, her ears remain clear. Quiet. It's maybe another 20 minutes before Mum appears in the hall with Ron. Is it true? Fred asks, jumping to his feet like a spring, all those hours of sitting still snapping in a moment. Mum gives him a stern look. Come along, she says, taking Ginny's hand. But the twins aren't to be shaken off, not tonight. Is you know who really back? George demands. Mum blusters and doesn't want to burden them, but if you know who could find his way to Harry, he can find his way to anyone. Ron is the one to stop, to turn back and look at them, his face pale and uncharacteristically serious. It's true. Harry saw him. Mum spins to glare at him. Ronald. For once, he doesn't look contrite, looking straight back at her like even he's beginning to grow up a little in the face of what's coming. They deserve to know, he says. Mum shakes her head, bustling them all out into the entranceway. Off to bed with all of you. As a unit they all turn toward the stairs. Ginny comes to a stop in the middle of the foyer. Mum. My room is that way, she says, pointing in the opposite direction. Mum stops, one foot almost comically lifted over the bottom stair. Right, she says, looking flustered. Torn. She turns back towards Ginny. Of course. Fred drops an arm over Ron's shoulders and grins in a way that doesn't even begin to travel anywhere near his eyes. Don't worry, Mum. We'll see little Ronikins back to his bed. Tuck him in real nice, George agrees, patting Ron on the head. Ron takes an indignant swipe at George, and Ginny wants to follow them with more sharpness than she's felt since her first day at Hogwarts. Mum takes the time to kiss and hug each of them before letting them go up, and Ginny knows things have to be bad when they all let her with minimum fuss. Even Ron. Night, Ron says. She watches him walk away with one hand shoved hard in his pocket, no doubt tight around his wand, like he's waiting for something to jump out at him any moment. Mum takes her hand, clearing her throat. She looks around. I don't actually know where. Ginny nods. This way. She leads her down the stairs and under the grounds towards the lake, the air becoming cooler and humid in a way that has become familiar to Ginny. Mum is quiet, and Ginny tries not to let that put her even more on edge. More than anything, she wants to hear her mum say everything's going to be okay, that you know who being out there isn't the end of everything, but Mum looks so pale and worried that Ginny doesn't dare ask. Is Harry all right? Ginny asks instead as they stop in front of the entrance to her common room. Mum's eyes are worried when she turns away from an intent inspection of the blank stone wall hiding the entrance to the Slytherin dorms. The smile she summons doesn't quite hide it. Of course, dear. He's fine. They're only keeping him overnight in the infirmary to be certain. Ginny gnaws on the inside of her cheek. Will you go back and stay with him? Mum gives her an assessing look, like that one she uses sometimes to gauge if it's time to buy another pair of robes for her constantly growing sons. Do you think I should? Ginny nods. She doesn't like the idea of Harry all alone in the infirmary, especially after what's happened. She knows if it was one of them, Mum couldn't have been forced to leave, by Dumbledore or anyone. I think he'd like that. Mum gives Ginny another smile, only this one is bright with something that makes Ginny's chest tight. She brushes her hair back from her face the way she used to when she was still a baby, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You're a good girl, Ginny, she says, fierce pride in her voice. Ginny gives her a hug, lingering a second longer to breathe her in. Good night, Mum. She whispers the password into the wall and disappears inside. In the common room, not too many students are still up. She's just turned into the hall leading to her room when she hears Draco's voice in the distance behind her. Too bad it wasn't Potter instead. Suppose it would have been too much to ask for both of them to snuff it. Ginny freezes as their laughter jangles discordantly in her ears. She's heard her brothers speak of seeing red, of reaching the end of their tether and losing it completely, but for her it's not really like that. Nothing snaps. Her vision doesn't change. It's more like a giant calm welling up in her, a sense of knowing, for once, exactly what she has to do. You're a good girl, Ginny. This is easy, this is concrete. Something she can fight, unlike the things that are unfolding outside, already pulling her family apart. She turns on her heel and marches straight for Draco. Draco pops up to his feet in surprise when he notices her furious pace, his companions much slower on the uptake. She doesn't stop striding towards him until she is right up in his face, pushing him hard in the middle of the chest. He falls back down to the couch with an exclamation of protest, his goons jumping to their feet on either side. Ginny pulls her wand, hitting Goyle straight on with a bat bogey hex and stepping back out of Crab's reach as he lunges for her. Just another Quidditch match, she tells herself. Another quick curse and she has Crab's arms bound, leaving Draco sitting wide-eyed on the couch by himself. All that misery-fed studying paying off, and, oh, does life work in mysterious ways sometimes. She steps closer to Draco until she's standing over him and says what she should have the first time he laid a hand on her. "I'm not afraid of you, Malfoy. So if you want a fight, I'm more than happy to give you one." She can tell he didn't expect her to fight back, to go on the offensive. He's stuck now though, being called out. There aren't many people here to witness it, just a few Slytherin with no interest in spectacles or Triwizard tournaments. They have no idea still, no idea what has happened outside these walls, how everything has changed. They watch on with various levels of indifference as if merely curious to see how this turns out rather than caring at all who wins. It gives Ginny the strange sensation that she's safe in here, safe in the knowledge that her housemates aren't blindly bound by rules. It's the very last thing she ever thought to feel here. Time stretches long, and Draco still hasn't reached for his wand, too frightened to act without his brutish friends. He seems to realize it too. "You'll regret this," Weasley Draco drawls, voice dripping with menace. "No," she says, wand twisting in her fingers. "I don't think I will. You're stronger than you know, Ginny. It's the only thing Tom was ever right about. She's no longer an easy target, and they both know it. He proves her right when she turns her back on him, a risk, but a necessary one, and he does nothing other than sit and watch her walk away." She passes by Theodora on her way out. Her eyes are glued to her book as if nothing untoward has happened, but Ginny thinks there is the slightest smirk playing at her lips as she reads. "You're left deciding that for yourself. Not if you know who has anything to say about it." Ginny feels her own grim smile slip. She turns down the hall and heads for her room. Underscore 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 underscore. A week later they all go home, whispers and rumors and lies twining and building like a gossamer web. Slytherin's brightest sun has been reborn. Ginny waits along with everyone else to see what that will mean.